The traitor legions are afflicted with the most disgusting curses known to man. Malformed monstrosities which prey upon the innocent souls of the galaxy. Each corrupts the very fabric of reality in order to corrode the virtues of the Emperor's domains. For today, we shall elucidate the bloated reapers of the 14th Legion, who tending to the Grandfather's garden spreads disease and pestilence. The sons of the Pale King, the Death Guard.
Forget no insult, my sons, as I have never forgotten those of my father, of the Emperor, nor those of Horus. Forgive no slight or grievance. Hold your bitterness deep within you, and there let it fester. Let it roil and squirm and churn, until you are filled with bile so poisonous that all you touch falls to ruin. Thus shall you serve Nurgle best. Thus shall you spread his virulent gifts across the false Imperium, and watch its final rotting.
The Primarchs of his Imperium, though demigods of humanity, would not be without flaws. Brashness, arrogance, and pride would mark the fall and disgrace of many of the Emperor's sons, for even in his most loyal champions, they would lay bare their most exploitable weaknesses in personality and resolve. For today, we shall elucidate a Primarch enshrined in bitterness and morose isolation. The Primarch of the 14th Legion, Mortarion. During the scattering of the Primarchs, the 14th child of the Emperor would be transported to the death world of Barbarous. Wreathed in deadly toxins, the steam-fueled contraptions of the planet would heavily influence the demeanor and temperament of the Primarch's personality. The populace would be ruled by inhuman necromancers, empowered by the influence of chaos, whilst Barbarous's human inhabitants would attempt to farm the land for a meager existence within the small pockets of the world not sullied by poison. Constantly wary of the creatures spawned by the necromantic overlords of the planet, the humans would toil in ignorance as the Primarch's gestation pod would be discovered. Among the ceaseless battlefields between the overlords of Barbarous, one such tyrant would discover a child among the corpses of the war zone. Perplexed at the child's tolerance to the noxious air of the land, the overlord would find the infant screaming among the dead. The High Overlord, Nekar, would see an opportunity for his superhuman foundling to become the heir to his legacy. Naming the child Mortarion, or Child of Death in Barbara native dialect, the Primarch of the 14th would be housed within a small tower enveloped in the planet's toxic fumes. The High Overlord of Barbarous would diligently build his own lair within the most toxic peak of the planet's mountains. Mortarion's superhuman resistance to poison and disease would be pushed to its limit as the maturing child's lungs fought desperately to filter the miasma with every breath. Gifted with a voracious hunger for knowledge, Mortarion would be tutored by his captor in all manner of battle doctrines and arcane arts. Yet as the child matured, his mind would come to question the lot of Barbarous's human populace and the manner in which they would be treated. Questions which would go unanswered should the young Primarch remain in captivity. Escaping his tower of isolation, Mortarion would fell any guard whom attempted to stand in his path. Venturing to the valleys of Barbarous, Mortarion's tolerance for poisons would allow him to survive the noxious mists. Finding the human populace to be of his own species, Mortarion would realize his kinship with the oppressed people of the poisonous world. Slow to trust the Primarch, the Barbarans would see the child of the mountains to be an unnatural interloper into their ranks. Such opinions would be short-lived with the Primarch's defense of the settlement from the attack of a horrific creature. Dispatched by a rival overlord of the necromancers, the settlers would stand little chance of defending themselves from the monster's rampage. Yet with the intervention of Mortarion, armed with a large harvesting scythe, the monster would be slain. The necromancer overlord would smirk at the upstart defender of Barbarous as he retreated back into the poison mists yet would be shocked as the Child of Death charged into the noxious fumes and cleaved him in two with his scythe. Championed by the people of Barbarus, Mortarion would use his knowledge, bequeathed from his foster father, to reinforce the settlements of the valleys. Creating strongholds and traveling from settlement to settlement, Mortarion would transform the disorganized and vulnerable citizens into a resistance militia. Recruiting the most durable and bold men of the settlements into a band of warriors, Mortarion would train his lieutenants, capable of leading small battalions. Incorporating artificers and blacksmiths to create weapons and armor for his men, Mortarion's band would soon be equipped to venture into the poisoned wastes of the world and fight at his side. His so-called Death Guard would battle against the hordes of the necromancers, and with each victory, hone their martial prowess and adapt their armor to endure ever-increasingly deadly environments. Besting the overlords of the planet, only one trial would stand in their way before the world of Barbarus would be rid of the malevolent curse of its ruling tyrants. Mortarion's foster father, Nekar, and his fortress within the most deadly peak of the mountains. Assembling his men to assault the fortress of the High Overlord, Mortarion would be conflicted in waging war against his father figure. Under the advisement of his most trusted advisor, Callus Typhon, the Death Guard would call off their assault of the stronghold of the Necromancer. Their armor would not be capable of surviving the deadly peak of the mountains until further advancements could be made. As such, Mortarion would withdraw his people to their village, yet on their return, be informed of the arrival of a peculiar stranger to their settlement, promising salvation. Confronting the stranger as he sat in conference with the elders of the village, Mortarion would balk at the insinuation that he was capable of liberating his people unaided. Offering Mortarion a challenge, the stranger would give the ultimatum that he would intervene if the champion of Barbarus would be unable to defeat the High Overlord. Should the stranger lend his might, Mortarion would swear fealty to him, yet should Mortarion free his people unaided, the stranger would leave the planet. Alone, Mortarion would venture to the stronghold of his foster father, despite the protestation of his Death Guard. Seeking to prove the stranger wrong, the Child of Death would attempt to breach the thick smog of toxins surrounding the High Overlord's fortress. Mortarion's armor began to rust and fragment with every step closer to his prize. Yet as Mortarion reached the gates of the Overlord's citadel, he would collapse. Nekar would stand outside the gates of his citadel and mock the Child of Death for his weakness. Within Mortarion's mind, a whisper of a being of malicious intent would resound. The being known as Nurgle had delighted in Mortarion's circumstance and began his slow influence within his mind. Nekar would attempt to end the Primarch's life, yet before delivering the fatal blow, the stranger to the village would intervene. Slaying the High Overlord with his sword wreathed in flame, the stranger would save the life of the Child of Death. Recovering from the ordeal, Mortarion would, true to his word, pledge his fealty to his revealed true father, the Emperor. Granting Mortarion command of the 14th Legion, the Dusk Raiders, it would not be long before the Primarch would incorporate his barbarian warriors into the Legion's ranks and rename them the Death Guard. Yet despite the Emperor's salvation of his homeworld and the death of its tyrannical overlord, Mortarion's pride would be irrevocably damaged. Denied vengeance against his life's tormentor, Mortarion would bear a grudge against the Master of Mankind which would never heal. With time, the slight submerged deep within his psyche would be nurtured and exploited by the plague god, Nurgle. For Mortarion's descent into the thrall of chaos had already begun. Rallying his new legion and restructuring its ranks to reflect his homeworld's cultural trappings, Mortarion would be a striking figure to his Terran-born Astartes. The manifestation of the ancient Terran figure of the Grim Reaper, the Lord of Death would utter a simple axiom to his legion.
You are my unbroken blades. You are the Death Guard. By your hand shall justice be delivered, and doom shall stalk 1,000 worlds.
Striking fear into the hearts of the Imperium's foes, the 14th Legion would trudge a relentless path of destruction in the Emperor's name. Drafting recruits exclusively from Barbarus, the Terran cultural heritage within the Legion would erode with time. Creating tension within the Legion, As the Great Crusade waged on, the Terran Astartes of the 14th would dwindle. The Death Guard would bring compliances to the Imperium with the fervor of liberation. Never pausing their crusade, as each world fell to their scythes, the Death Guard would resupply their might in transit to their next objective. Never reinforcing or garrisoning worlds brought into their compliance, the Death Guard would sow death and reap their harvest of souls. Fueled by a desire to cleanse humanity of terror and oppression, Mortarian's campaigns would be waged without mercy or restraint. Often waging joint campaigns with his brother Primarch, Horus Lupercal, the Death Guard and the Lord of Death would gain a reputation as a reliable and efficient legion. Weakening their foes with their sheer fortitude in battle, the Death Guard would drain their opposition of firepower until the 16th Legion, the Lunar Wolves, would deliver the hammer blow to destroy their ranks. A close bond would form between Horus and Mortarion, despite the Lord of Death's visage of breathing apparatus and pallid skin, resulting in the majority of his Primarch brethren to distance themselves from his favor. Deemed a freakish figure among the sons of the Emperor, with exception given to the Night Haunter of Nostramo, Mortarion would be criticized by his brothers, such as the Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion, Rabute Guilliman, for cherishing his brotherhood of Horus above even the Emperor's grace. For in time, such a criticism of the Lord of Death's character would be proven to be true. As the Great Crusade began to draw to a close, the use of Psykers within the Legiones Astartes would begin to cause concern within the Imperium. The Librarius had proven time and again to be a tool of great power among the legions, yet their reliance of drawing power from the unstable depths of the warp would be called into question. Convening the Council of Nicaea, Primarchs and Astartes alike would debate on the use of Psykers within the Astartes ranks. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, would champion their inclusion, whilst Mortarion would seek to abolish their continual use. The Lord of Death's childhood had been plagued by the influence of foul sorcery, and shown Mortarion firsthand the depths and depravity that those who wielded psychic powers could stoop. Convincing the Emperor to disband the Librarius, Mortarion would be satisfied with his father's decision to outlaw sorcery within the legions. Yet such a victory to his ideals and values would not be enough to absolve the Emperor of the Lord of Death's resentment. The War Master of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal, would begin his descent into the clutches of chaos with the intervention of the Plague God. Wounded by the Anaphane blade, wielded by the corrupted planetary governor, Eugen Temba, the chosen pawn of Nergalef would injure the Primarch of the 16th Legion and allow for his corruption by the forces of chaos. Now poised to overthrow the galaxy with his rebellion to the throne, the War Master would turn to his trusted brother for allegiance. Mortarion had never been accepted by the Emperor, nor his most lauded sons, save for Horus. The War Master would reveal to Mortarion that the Emperor had stolen power from the beings of the Warp, and empowered himself through their means to become the most powerful Psyker of the galaxy. Mortarion's intolerance of Psykers would cement his resolve to face the Emperor, and alongside the Sons of Horus, the Death Guard would join in their betrayal. The Death Guard's path to damnation had been set, for even among their ranks, the seeds of corruption had been planted. First Captain Kalas Typhon had concealed his surrender to the ruinous powers, and with the influence of his rank, sown the influence of the Plague God into the 14th Legion. Upon the Istvan system, the traitor legions would begin their campaign to conquer the Imperium. Purging the loyalist remnants within their legions, the Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, and Death Guard would slaughter their brethren. The lingering glories of the Dusk Raiders would be expunged from the ranks of the Death Guard, and despite the escape of the Legion's battle captain, Nathaniel Garrow, and a detachment of loyalist Death Guard, the 14th submission to chaos would begin. Deploying his men to aid in the betrayal of the loyalist counterattack during the Istvan V Dropsite massacre, Mortarion would not linger to indulge in the grudges perpetrated by his traitorous brothers. Without delay, the Lord of Death would venture to attempt to bring another legion into the fold of the traitor war effort. Horus had been especially close to the Primarch of the White Scars, Jagatai Khan, during the Great Crusade, and as such, the Lord of Death would use this bond to bring the Khan of Khans into the fold. Absent from the opening stages of the Horus heresy, the Fifth Legion had not pledged their blades to either side of the conflict. Refusing to intervene by aiding the Space Wolves within the Alaxis Nebula in the wake of the burning of Prospero, the White Scars would travel to the homeworld of the Thousand Suns to find answers. Confronting the Warhawk within the ashen derelicts of Prospero, the Lord of Death would offer the Khan an invitation to join their rebellion against the Emperor. Observing Mortarian's changes gifted by the ruinous powers, Jaghatai would surmise that the Pale King merely sought to expunge every trace of Psykers from the galaxy. Having drafted the outlines of the Librarius alongside his brothers Magnus and Sanguinius, the Khan, though not gifted with psychic power, would be sympathetic to those who were gifted with such abilities. Despite the restraint suggested by the White Scars and the Emperor's decision to outlaw the use of the Librarius, the traitors had surrendered to the beings of the Warp, and for such flagrant hypocrisy, the Warhawk would refuse to side with the Lord of Death. Warning Mortarion that the Warp shall claim him should he continue on his path, Mortarion had chosen to betray humanity for the promise of strength and found his rewards wanting. The Kargan would state that the Primarchs were not empire builders, for only the Emperor could be capable of leading humanity. Enraged at the Khan's refusal to join the traitor legions, Mortarion and his Death Guard would battle the White Scars and their Primarch. The Keshig and Death Shroud would clash as the sons of the Emperor circled one another. The Death Lord and Kargan would clash, their blows matching one another in a battle between speed and constitution. Yet with the arrival of the Death Guard fleet above Prospero, Mortarion would retreat from the fray. With the Second Battle of Prospero ended and his attempt to recruit the Fifth Legion failed, Mortarion would command his fleet to purge the planets of the Prosperine system. For the Lord of Death sought answers within the bones of the Crimson King's empire. Upon the Mandeville Point during 007.M31, Mortarion would descend upon the world and capture one of its inhabitants. Possessed by a demon of the Warp, the captive woman shackled within the Death Guard flagship, Endurance, would reveal its nature to Mortarion. Having never encountered such a being, the Pale King would be taunted by the possessed woman's insinuation that his soul had been claimed by the Lord of Decay. His intolerance of the Warp further stoked, Jaghatai's words had been proven true, for Mortarion was now surrounded by the servants of fell gods. Alone in his resolve to stave off the influence of chaos among the traitor ranks, Mortarion would seek the means to prevent his damnation. Yet the power of Nurgle would not be denied, for Mortarion had not been chosen. He had been claimed. Believing himself to be incorruptible, the possessed woman would mock the Primarch's self-delusion and hypocrisy. Transforming into a being of the Immaterium, the demon would taunt the Lord of Death as he struggled and failed to crush it with his raw strength. Forced to unleash his innate yet repressed psychic abilities buried deep within, Mortarion would rend the demon apart. Mockingly saluting the Primarch with the phrase, "Hail, Master of the Plague," as its soul receded back into the Immaterium, it would leave the Lord of Death in his state of hypocrisy. Now empowered with the very sorceries he had always denied, Mortarion would acknowledge his self-loathing nature and attempt to master the Warp to prevent becoming its pawn. The Death Guard Legion would become fragmented with the First Captain's continual fascination and pursuit of the powers of the Chaos Gods. Already tutored in the arts of sorcery by the Wordbearer's first chaplain, Erebus, Typhon would not repress nor hide his own psychic abilities. Mortarion would order his legion to aid in the assault of the Siege of Terror, yet callous Typhon now no longer served the whims of his Primarch. Surrendering his soul, men and vessels, to the clutches of Nurgle within the Immaterium, the splintering of the Death Guard by its first captain had begun. Murdering the navigators of the fleet, Typhon would allow the fleet under Mortarion's command to be soaked in the powers of Nurgle within the Immaterium. Unable to escape the warp, the Astartes of the fleet would transform into bloated, pus-coated beings. Their rusted armor and rotten flesh, ripe for the many contagions and viruses, to grow plump within their seeping wounds and rotten skin. Mortarion would not be spared such gifts of the Plague God, nor once more be saved by the Emperor's grace. Mortarion would endure untold suffering and transform until the gifts of Nurgle would cease. Reborn as a demon prince of the Plague Father, Mortarion would pledge his soul and the fate of his legion as a bargain of his deliverance from pain. Returning to real space as horrific harbingers of disease and pestilence, the Death Guard would join the traitor assault of the Siege of Terra. Descending as the first assault wave upon the throne world and slaughtering swathes of the defenders of the Imperium, Mortarion and his Death Guard would wreak havoc. Conquering the Colossi Gate, the Death Guard would redeploy to the Marmax Bastion, and once again face the Warhawk and his White Scars in battle. Mortarion's outcast Geneson, Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow, would intervene and alongside his knights-errant confront his Genefather. Offering Garrow the chance to rejoin his legion, the Hand of the Sigillite would reject the corrupted Primarch's offer, and before perishing, wound Mortarion with his broken blade, Libertas. Capturing the Lionsgate spaceport from Imperial forces, Jaghatai would engage Mortarion in the battle to reclaim the vital linchpin of the Throne World's defense. Once again dueling, Jaghatai would be no match against the now fully empowered pawn of Chaos, yet the Kargan knew a weakness he could exploit. Scolding Mortarion's weakness of giving himself to the entities of the Warp, the Kargan would strike a crippling blow to the Lord of Death's ego. Taking advantage of Mortarion's frenzied state, Jaghatai would injure the Lord of Death before being impaled by Mortarion's scythe, Silence. Pulling himself close to Mortarion, Jaghatai would endure the pain of the blade as it dug deep into his flesh and decapitate the Pale King. Banished into the roiling tides of the Warp, Mortarion would materialize once more into the mortal realm and claim dominion of a demon world. Residing on the Plague Planet, the disgraced Lord of Death would not show his presence within the Imperium for many millennia. His Plague Marines of the 14th had failed during the Siege of Terra, and the Horus Heresy had been thwarted by the Emperor and the Loyalists to the throne. Ruling his world as a tyrant, alike to his foster father, the hypocrisy of Mortarion would ascend new heights as he ruled the world as a tyrannical overlord. Ascending fully into the form of a demon prince, Mortarion would rule his kingdom as the Death Guard splintered into warbands of varying loyalties. Yet with the dawn of the 41st millennium, the Pale King would return to real space. During 901.M41, Mortarion would slay the Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, Cornavin, and be banished by his successor, Kaldor Drago. Carving his predecessor's name onto Mortarion's heart, Mortarion would temporarily be banished once more to the Immaterium. However, the birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum across the stars would herald a new dawn for the Death Guard. The Great Rift would demand opposition, and with the return of the Avenging Sun, Rebute Guilliman, Mortarion would wage his great plague war upon Ultramar. Seeking to corrupt Macragge and its subordinate planets and spread the Garden of Nurgle across the bones of their ravaged husks, the Pale King would be confronted by the Ultramarines and their Primarch. Dueling Guilliman upon the world of Ajax in single combat, the culmination of the Plague Wars would see Mortarion slay the Primarch of the 13th. Resurrected by the Emperor, through Guilliman, the Master of Mankind would banish Mortarion once more and deal a wound upon the Plague God, Nurgle. His garden burning and champion defeated, Nurgle would be displeased with his chosen Primarch as he tends to his wounded pride and ambition. Yet one day, the Prince of Decay shall return, to wreak untold miseries upon the galaxy.
Now I do not accuse my brother of such barbarism, but no evil begins with such monstrous acts. If it did, no sane man would ever consider it. No, it begins slowly, A small step here, a small step there. By such acts is a man's heart turned black and rotten. A man may begin with noble intentions, believing that such small trespasses are minor things compared to the good he will do at the end of his course. But every act matters, from the smallest to the greatest.
The flies feasted on them, eating in through the soft tissues of their bodies and the jelly of their eyes. Even those sealed tight inside their breastplate could not escape, as the warp-tainted insects seemed to be able to pass through the tiniest of apertures in search of meat to chew upon. Then, like the outrush of a retreating tide, the screaming swarm left the desiccated bodies of the fallen behind and imploded back towards the center of the chamber. At the eye of this pestilent storm stood Mortarion and his former brother in battle. Whatever animating essence had been Ignatius Grulgor boiled out of the demon flesh as it died, the flies ignoring the dissolving, putrid mass that had been the eater of lives, content to let the demon discorporate and crumble. Instead, they whirled around Typhon in a stream of dark blurs before suddenly diving into him. The swarm bored up through the great wound Mortarion's scythe had left in the first captain, and they plunged down his open mouth. He welcomed them, taking everything they gave. Aghast, Mortarion could do nothing as Typhon's body twitched, writhed and distended to accommodate the transformation eating him from the inside out. His back swelled amid the crackle of fracturing bone and ceramite, and dense flutes of fissured horn burst out, each one spitting clouds of flies as smoke would belch from a chimney. He shuddered, sloughing off lumps of dead, grey flesh to reveal the new bloom of rotting muscle beneath. Where his battle armor ended and the putrid meat of him began was impossible to see. Finally, with a repellent crunch of breaking cartilage, the nub of a twisted horn grew from the first captain's swollen face. He glanced up, wheezing and shuddering, and with each indrawn breath and exhalation, Mortarion could hear the droning of the flies inside him. He had become a hive for the things, a living nest for the destroyer plague. "Callus," Mortarion whispered in the deathly silence that followed. "What have you done?"
"Know my name," came the seething reply. "I am the herald of what we shall be, Mortarion."
He drew himself up, flexing his arms and testing the play in his mutated, new form.
"I am Typhus."
The pawns of chaos are often the victims of scheming gods, unaware of the true intent of their benefactors and the resultant paths they will tread. Champions, lords and demon princes all dance to the tune of corruption, decadence, and depravity, yet only the most malevolent schemers chose to pledge their service to the primordial annihilator willingly. For today, we shall elucidate the chosen herald of the plague god and architect of the downfall of his kinsman and even Genesire, the first captain of the Death Guard Legion, Typhus the Traveler. Among the planets which would harbor the sons of the Emperor, many Death Worlds forged Primarchs and Legions molded through strife and ruin. The noble first revered the feral wilds of Caliban and incorporated knightly virtues into their orders, whilst the Forge Masters of the 18th looked to their volcanic landscapes of Nocturne as inspiration for their Promethean cult. Yet among such desolate bodies of suffering and toil, one planet would be marked as little more than a playground for degenerate tyrants, Barbarus. Ruled by malevolent psychers, utilizing their warp-spawned powers to reanimate the dead of countless battles fought for land and influence. The human denizens of this accursed world eked out a harsh existence as farmers within the new settlements of untainted soil. So terrible were the actions of these necromancer overlords that many who lived upon Barbarous exterminated all vestiges of psychic potential from their kin, for to allow such mutants to live would surely usher future torment if left unchecked. A child of Barbarous wandered the farmlands of his home, every plant in his presence shriveling and object stirring with each moment of emotional stress endured. A boy named Callus Typhon. A hybrid born, sharing blood with an overlord of Barbarous, the villagers of Callus's tribe drowned his mother following his birth, yet could not bring themselves to murdering an innocent. With time, the boy learned to master his psychic potential. The elders of his village, impressed by his innate talent to harness such powers to benefit his people. Training to one day become capable of defending his tribe from the oppression of the necromancer overlords, a chance to emancipate his people presented itself with the defection of a fostered son of High Overlord Nakar, Mortarion. Ignorant of the Primarch's true genetic legacy, Callus by a quirk of fate encountered Mortarion during his escape from his jailer's keep and led the towering figure to the sanctuary of his village. Inviting persecution from Nakar, Mortarion took up the harvesting scythe of the people of the village and slew the pawns of his armies, his blade carving through swathes of their men before hunting down the leader of the ragtag band of undead thralls. Impressed with the giant warrior's martial skill and resolved to liberate Barbarous's populace from oppression, Typhon pledged to fight at the side of the Reaper of Souls as the first of his rebel militia, the Death Guard. Assuming the mantle of Mortarion's lieutenant and most trusted advisor, Callus Typhon fought by the side of Mortarion as their war against the overlords began to tip the scales of power. Present during the Emperor's reunion with his gene son, the half-breed of Barbarous required new purpose following the death of High Overlord Nakar, and after being screened by the apothecaries of the Dusk Raiders of Terra, proved to be a perfect candidate to join their ranks. Drawing recruits from Typhon's clan of origin, the Death Guard's character changed irrevocably. The stoic Terran warriors of old supplanted with this hardy breed of dour Barbarans. Though Callus was trusted above all of his genesire's progeny, such favor could never protect him from the Legion's disdain for the use of psychic powers. Concealing his talents from his kinsmen, Typhon mastered the 14th Legion's tactics and training suited to tests of stamina, constitution, and endurance. Already proven in the eyes of his liege due to his stalwart service during the war against the overlords of Barbarous, it came as surprise to no one that Callus was destined to lead the 14th Legion as their first captain. His immense strength and durability, unaided by his use of psychic powers, none could know the full extent of his martial and strategic prowess should he one day let loose his full psychic potential. Leading his men throughout the Great Crusade as a noteworthy, if not unsubtle, warrior king, the 14th steeds, made in Typhon's name, resounded throughout the Imperium. Wading through the deadliest of war zones with ease, no matter the toxic hazards nor firepower pitted against his men, the Man Reaper of the first captain claimed untold thousands of lives in service to the Emperor's vision for a united galaxy. Each first captain of the Legions was a legend in their own right during this era of prosperity, and even among such heroic figures, Callus Typhon stood tall. Respected greatly by the foster father of the Lion, Sar Luther, these knightly cousins born of distant death worlds bore a shared admiration for their deeds made as warriors, forged from hostile origins. Surviving wounds which would slay a typical Astartes, Typhon's head injury sustained from the tribe wars of Rothric IX, rather than disorientating him, spurred him on to greater heights of slaughter. Saving a squadron of the Silent Sisterhood during the campaign of Madrigal, Typhon's act of cushioning the force of an exploding crack grenade with his body took only a mere week to recover from within his legion's apothecarion.
the champion of a legion characterized by stubborn defiance in the face of horrendous odds. Even the 49 Death Shroud elite, handpicked by the Lord of Death, paled in comparison to their captain. For even among a force such as the Angels of Death, reputed to be incapable of fear, those who followed Kallus Typhon could not honestly proclaim a lack of terror at the sight of this harbinger of destruction. Typhon's star had been in ascendance for many years, with the closing of the Great Crusade on the horizon. Yet for all his efforts made in the name of his legion, he still could not reveal his nature. The taboo of warp powers still ingrained within his kinsmen. Should they learn of his powers, it was likely that they would cut him down alike to just another foe they had already slain in the margins of millions throughout their campaigns waged in the name of the Imperium. The Master of Mankind had decreed the Edict of Nicaea, a stricture on all use of psykers within the Legiones Astartes, and his own Gene-Sire had personally declared that use of any manipulations of the Immaterium were an affront to nature. Typhon was alike to a caged bird, his wings never able to unfurl and take flight, whilst under the watchful eyes of his hypocritical emancipator. Yet little did Kallus know that another's gaze had been watching him with interest for decades. Those of the first chaplain of the Wordbearers Legion, Erebus. Promising Typhus freedom from the regime that entrapped him, Erebus inducted Kallus into the fraternal seven-pillared warrior lodge and revealed fell secrets drawn from the primordial pantheon. Glimpsing portents of the grandeur awaiting himself and his kin should they cast off the shackles of the imperial truth, a revelation shook Typhon to his core and set the first captain down the path of damnation. In the stead of the Emperor, the Primarch of the 16th Legion, Horus Lupercal, would reign as the master of mankind, and all those who bore the gift of psychic mutation would be unfettered. Standing at the side of his Primarch, Mortarion, Typhus conspired with his Gene-Sire to cleanse their legion of those loyal to the Emperor, and chose to revolt against his will. The overwhelming Barbaran stock of the 14th Legion stood in lockstep with their Primarch, concealing their intention to quell their Terran forebears and any of their own bloodlines who defied the ascendance of the War Master of Chaos. Ordering his subordinate, Commander Ignatius Grulgor of the Second Great Company, to keep a close eye on the Terran-born battle captain, Nathaniel Garrow, during their coup, Typhon knew in his heart that such a staunch scion of the Imperium could never be swayed to their cause. Upon Istvan Free, the traitor contingents of the Death Guard set their plot into motion, deploying their loyalist brethren onto the surface of the planet before smothering their number with barrages of virus bombs and cleansing flame. Not even the Sons of Mortarion could endure the fell payloads of such Exterminatus-class weapons, and as Typhus watched the death of this far-flung world from orbit, he felt a strange feeling of unease as their meticulous scheme unfolded. Aboard the Voidcraft, the Eisenstein, Nathaniel Garrow and those loyal to the Emperor had slain Grulgor and begun maneuvers to escape the Istvan system. Attempting to intercept the escaping frigate aboard his flagship, the Terminus Est, though Typhon managed to heavily damage the vessel, the Eisenstein escaped into the warp and would soon bring word of the clandestine betrayal to the attention of the Emperor. Thousands of Death Guard littered the soil of Istvan Free, yet small bands of warriors remained on its surface. For 3 months, Typhon alongside the traitor legions of the Emperor's children, World Eaters, and Sons of Horus purged the remnants of their valiant former kin. With word reaching the Imperium of the atrocity of Istvan Free, a retribution fleet consisting of the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard were dispatched. Rivers of blood soaked the soil of Istvan V as the wearied traitor legions held back the wrath of the Emperor, their patience rewarded with the defection of the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers and Alpha Legion in the ensuing second wave of battle. Horus's rebellion now held claim to 9 legions following the conclave of the Primarchs, for even Magnus the Red of Prospero had suffered at the hands of the loyal sons of the Imperium and pledged his service to their new benefactors. Once more reunited with the bearers of the word, their influence guided Typhon to seek out the Plague Lord, Nurgle, within the dark corners of the Void as he embarked with a splinter fleet of the 14th. Typhon was much changed, for he no longer fought in the name of the Emperor, nor even his Primarch. Callas fought only for himself and the patron for whom he now pledged fealty. Mortarion's Death Guard remained ignorant of the true power of Chaos, for unlike the sons of the Phoenician, who thirsted for stimuli, scions of the Red Angel, who hungered for blood, and ravenous scholars of the Crimson King seeking knowledge, the 14th spurned the gifts they so richly deserved. Taking action into his own hands, Typhus attempted to acquire the mysterious Tucholcha engine in possession of the Dark Angel's Legion. Failing to wrestle control of the powerful artifact from the Lion of Caliban, Typhon retreated to the Zarimun system to seek sanctuary from an old ally. Meeting with Sarlufa, his old friend concealed the Death Guard fleet from the pursuing Retribution force under the command of the Dark Angel Seneschal, Corswain. Noticing changes within his form, the gifts of Nurgle had begun to bloom within Typhon, and Lufa knew in his heart that the being known as Callas would soon transform into something else entirely. A student of Chaos Grimoires, gifted by First Chaplain Erebus, Sarlufa knew not the full extent of the transformation which Typhon would endure, yet cared only for the safety of Caliban, and so resupplied Callas's fleet to embark upon the Void once more. Instructed by Erebus to meet with his Genesire to enact the meticulous ploy devised between them, Typhon returned to Mortarion's side upon the world of Enix. Dissatisfied with his Primarch's refusal to submit to the will of the Plague God, Callas slew the Death Guard's fleet navigators, framing them as conspirators with the Emperor's advisor, Malcador the Sigillite. Convincing Mortarion that his own psychic talents would suffice in allowing the fleet to navigate through the warp in order to meet with the traitors assembling at Ulanor, the fate of the Death Guard was forever sealed. Once within the Immaterium, Typhon delivered the fleet into the clutches of the Lord of Decay, his influence pouring through each Voidcraft until his gifts infected every living soul aboard. Nurgle's rot and the Destroyer Plague polluted the vessel as countless flies formed miasmas of sickness, disease, and corruption throughout their confines. Each bite of skin formed pustules and gelatinous ooze, growths and colonies of insects birthing from the marrow, organs and vestiges of tissue not sloughing into rotting puddles. So trained were the Death Guard to endure disease was their blessing turned into a curse, their adaptations allowing them to endure horrendous mutations. Confronting Callas within the Terminus Est, Mortarion struck his first captain with the blade of his deadly war scythe, Silence, its edge biting deep into his body, ending his life. Callas Typhon was dead, yet Grandfather Nurgle would not allow his chosen herald to perish, and as such, allowed him to rise once more. Ordering the returned First Plague Marine and Demon Prince, Ignatius Grilgor, to kill Typhus, as Grilgor suffocated the life from the first captain with his hands wrapped around his throat, the deadly flies swarming the ship devoured his flesh. Yet this abominable swarm of the Destroyer Plague had found a new vessel to harbor their grotesque hives, the corpse of the half-breed of Barbarus. Pouring into the corpse of Typhon, the Destroyer Plague transformed his body into a parody of life, protrusions erupting from his spine, his flesh melting from his bones as his armor bloated and a single sharp horn sprouted from his skull. Typhon was no more, for today, the being known only as Typhus the Traveler had been born. Observing the Plague God's influence invade the form of his Primarch, Typhus witnessed the Pale King submit his soul to serve the Grandfather in order to deliver his men from the unfathomable pain they had endured. Finally, the last Demon Prince of the Four had been claimed, and with the Pale King reborn in the image of the Lord of Decay, the Death Guard were truly ready to invade the Throne World. Typhus had near single-handedly changed the course of his legion's future, and through his actions proved to be worthy of the Plague God's favor. Capable of unleashing both the Destroyer Plague, Nurgle's rot, and his array of psychic talents at will, Typhus was truly a vessel for the most devastating gifts of the Lord of Pestilence. His cataphractite Terminator armor deformed to strange proportions, his Man-Reaper power scythe instilled terror into those that saw the bite of its edge. Present during the Siege of Terror, during 014.M31, Typhus fought alongside the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, Perturabo, first captain of the Sons of Horus, Ezekiel Abaddon, and the Dark Apostle of the Word-Bearers, Zardu Leak, in their efforts to breach the walls of the Imperial Palace. Summoning the Demon Prince of Nurgle, Korvax Utterblight, into the material realm, the rampage unleashed by the disgusting creature subverted the civilian populace's religious zeal and turned their faith into despair. As the siege protracted, Typhus faced the White Scars, Blood Angels, and Custodian Guard in battle as they fought tooth and nail to defend the Colossi Gate. Following the fall of the Colossi Gate, Corswain of the Dark Angels managed to retake and reactivate the Astronomicon within the Hollow Mountains, and in doing so had aided the traversal of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines legions to reinforce Terra. Dispatched by Mortarion to shut down the Astronomicon, Typhus's forces, though able to wound Corswain, proved unsuccessful in preventing the first living saint, Euphrates Keeler, from sustaining the light of the Astronomicon. Mortarion fell at the Battle of the Lionsgate Spaceport at the hands of the Warhawk, Jagatai Khan, and with the Pale King's banishment into the Warp, Typhus assumed total command of the Death Guard. Bereft of their Primarch, the 14th Legion could do little but erode away the defenses of the Loyalists. Yet with the Astronomicon active, it would not take long for the might of the Lion, Wolf King, and Lord of Ultramar to carry the day, and so it was that the War Master of Chaos, Horus Lupercal, sought to end the battle personally. Facing the Emperor in battle, the Lupercal fell, and all hope of the traitors' victory crumbled, their myriad forces retreating with all haste from their ill-fated siege. Typhus the Traveller endured, yet without the constraints of his Primarch, and given the authority to command the 14th Legion, Typhus rallied his men to retreat into the Eye of Terror. Mortarion with time returned and reigned over the demon world known simply as the Plague Planet, a hypocritical mockery of his homeworld of Barbarus, once more ruled by a malevolent tyrant. Disgusted by the mawkishness of his Genesire, Typhus abandoned the Death Guard Legion and committed himself as a true disciple of the Plague God, rallying a plague fleet in his image to enact the will of their patron. For much of the Garden of Nurgle required tending, and if its boundaries were to grow, new seeds must be planted across the stars. For 10 millennia, the Traveller wandered the expanse of the void at the head of his plague fleet, the unmistakable image of the Terminus Est, darkening the sky of each planet it loomed over. Across hundreds of worlds, the Destroyer Plague found new victims to feast upon and spread its malign influence. For wherever the Traveller treads, his virulent decay spreads unholy spores and hatchlings of the Grandfather. Fueled by a need to create the perfect plague in order to bring the galaxy to heel, Typhus has studied the flora, fauna, and creatures of the Garden of Nurgle and sought all means to hone his craft of decay and unclean renewal. Defending the Garden of Nurgle from invasion by the Blood Legions of Khorne, Typhus claimed the organs of his slain demon prince of the Blood God at the Bubbling Gully and offered them to Nurgle's cauldron. Rewarded with the chance to dip his scythe into the brew of Nurgle's cauldron at the side of his throne, now even close proximity to its stench is enough to lay low a mortal man. Favored far in excess of his Primarch, Typhus is imbued with the knowledge that he is favored beyond even a wayward son of the Emperor, and as such has sundered entire planets such as Caradina 7, Propheus, Ligita, Florence, and Jonah's world with myriad plagues and contagions. Attempting to form a new Astartes Legion during 988.M41 by fusing fallen angels and Death Guard together, dubbed as the Death Angels. Only through the actions of Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and Cypher were such calamitous ambitions sundered. Ordered by the Lord of Decay to bring ruin to the realm of Ultramar, following the revival of the Avenging Sun, Rabute Guilliman, once again the Traveler worked in cooperation with his Genesire in order to destroy the resurgent empire of the Galactic East. Harrying the outer system of Ultramar with his vast fleet, whilst the Pale King invaded its core worlds, Typhus made clear to his Primarch that he considered him little more than a tool of war for the Grandfather, and held no loyalty nor esteem for him. Warning Mortarion that his lack of devotion made in the name of the Grandfather would endanger the success of their campaign, the words of the Traveler held true with the conclusion of their invasion. Nurgle commanded Typhus to retreat from the invasion, for riper spoils lay in wait within the Scourge Stars as the gods of Chaos fought for dominion of the war in the Rift. Abiding the demands of his patron, the Traveler left Mortarion to persecute the Plague Wars alone, and in doing so, condemned him to failure. Though slaying the Avenging Sun with a strike of his war scythe coated in the poison concoction known as the Godblight, the Master of Mankind possessed the form of the Lord of Ultramar and unleashed his limitless divine light. Setting aflame the Garden of Nurgle, the folly of Mortarion in his refusal to abide by the will of the Plague God has cost much to his domain. The Pale King endures punishment at the hands of the Grandfather, yet Typhus the Traveler fervently continues to enact the will of his patron. Billions of innocents have perished by his hand through disease, decay, or the edge of his blade, his psychic powers enabling the spread of the Grandfather's influence despite the setbacks caused by the anathema. For the gifts of Nurgle are bountiful, and none have received more favor from the Grandfather than his obedient herald.
You do not believe, not truly,
said Typhus.
You have paid nothing for your power. The false Emperor made you, Genefather. Nurgle took you as a prize. You are a trophy, my lord. You would never have found your way to enlightenment without me. Without me, you would have nothing. You would be dead, your soul dispersed into the warp. I fought my way into the Great Father's attention. I became his herald by your will and by the dint of my own efforts. What have you done to win his favor?
Curb your insolence, said Mortarion.
Or what, my lord? I have Nurgle's favor. You would have dared to move against me. You think that you are in control, that your new being is separate from the warp, and yours to do with as you will. It is not. It is Nurgle's. You must submit to him fully, or Grandfather will have hard lessons for you. This place of yours to lead your brother on Nurgle's dance, it is ill-conceived. If we must strike, strike now. We should gather our fleets and cripple his forces while they gather at Macragge. Do not allow the luxury of time to consult with his warriors or consolidate his position.
Do not presume to tell me what to do, said Mortarion. You will work with us.
I will do as I please,
said Typhus.
If only you would abandon the last of your being to the Lord of Life, you would see. You have no power over me. You do not truly understand. If you did, then you and I might be reconciled.
Ignatius Grulgor served as the commander of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade, Horus Heresy, and Era Indomitus. Raised on the harsh world of Barbarus, Grulgor would endure the feral world's poisonous fog and the tyranny of the planet's warlord sorcerers. Each waking moment, a torrent of unrelenting horrors, Grulgor would one day ascend to join the ranks of the 14th Legion with the Emperor of Mankind's arrival to Barbarus. As one of the first non-Terran stock of the Legion, Ignatius would strive to prove his worth and be promoted to the rank of captain or commander of the Second Great Company during the Great Crusade. An arrogant, judgmental, and terse warrior, Grilgor would scheme behind the backs of his battle brothers in order to gain favour with his Primarch. Detesting all Terran-born Astartes of the Legion, Grilgor would reserve a special hatred for the battle captain of the 7th Great Company, Nathaniel Garro. Decrying his use of tradition and stoic pride, Grilgor would resent Garro's honourable demeanour. Calling him Straight Arrow Garro as an insult, Nathaniel's rejection to adopt the culture of Barbarous would further raise tensions between the two. Often tormenting Garro's housecarl, Caleb Aaron, Grilgor would never miss an opportunity to insult the Fail aspirant of the 14th Legion. His loyalty to Mortarion absolute, Grilgor would be among the first to join his Primarch in his plot to betray the Imperium. A member of the Legion's Warrior Lodge, Grilgor would aid in orchestrating the betrayal of the Legion's loyalist elements during the Istvan III atrocity. With 1/3 of the Legion pledged to defend the Emperor's vision, they would be deployed to Istvan III before the trap to destroy them would be snared. Yet due to Nathaniel Garro's injury during the initial stages of the campaign, he would be stationed upon the void ship frigate, Eisenstein, with a contingent of his company. Under the command of First Captain Callus Typhon, Grilgor would monitor Garro's actions aboard the Eisenstein during the opening salvos of the betrayal. Transporting Life Eater virus bombs onto the ship, Grilgor's dangerous cargo would be discovered by Garro's housecarl, Aaron, and the Death Guard apothecary, Merrick Voyan. Reporting to his master, Caleb Aaron would reveal Grilgor's deception. Confronted by Grilgor, Garro and his men would engage the traitor Death Guard. During the melee, Grilgor would fire his bolt pistol and accidentally damage one of the virus bomb shells. Due to the sacrifice of Caleb Aaron, Grilgor and his men would be sealed behind the ship's blast doors, causing the agonizing death of Ignatius and his men. Yet the foul being, known as Nurgle, would not allow Ignatius Grilgor to die. Reborn as the first Plague Marine within the Immaterium, the foul reincarnated being would once again combat the loyalist Death Guard. Alongside his resurrected allies, Grilgor would once again attempt to kill Nathaniel Garro aboard the Eisenstein. Infecting Garro's battle brother Solon Decius with his newly acquired Plague Knife, Garro would command the ship's bridge crew to make an emergency exit from the warp, and without the ruinous powers to sustain their physical forms, Grilgor and his men would dissipate from the material realm. Though not seen for many years, Grilgor would once again return to corrupt the mortal realm during the Era Indomitus. First sighted during 999.M41, Grilgor, now an ascended demon prince of Nurgle, would lead his warband of Plague Marines to attack the mining world of Medusa 5. The Lord of Chaos would wreak havoc across the planet, infecting and butchering the Astra Militarum regiments within the doomed monastery of Madrigal. With their infestation of the monastery complete, the fetid heretics would withdraw from the planet. Still at large within the darkest corners of the galaxy, Grilgor remains a malignant cancer amongst the stars. His death, should the Emperor will it, a blessing for all loyal subjects of his Imperium.
His dreams and hopes are in ruins, his trust proven false, and his brightest sun fall into darkness. These are bitter tidings, a nightmare made flesh, but they must reach the Emperor. Some individuals' contributions to the Imperium are crucial to the endurance of its legacy. Without the Emperor, there would be no Imperium. Without the Primarchs, there would be no Crusades. But without Nathaniel Garro, there would be no truth. Born on Terra's Albia region, Nathaniel Garro would join the Dusk Raiders Legion, predating the discovery of their Primarch Mortarion during the Emperor's Great Crusade. As a soldier of the 14th Legion, Garro would symbolize honor, knightly virtue, and stoic loyalty. Fighting alongside many legions during the Great Crusade, in aid of discovering the locations of the Primarchs, the Dusk Raiders would be infamous for their tactics of attacking their foes at nightfall, laying waste to their enemies with terrifying efficiency characterized by their endurance, survival instincts, and relentless fighting discipline. their armor's right arms coloured red to symbolise their cause as the Emperor's relentless and unstoppable right hand of judgment. Garrow would quickly rise through the 14th Legion, eventually becoming the captain of the 7th Great Company, earning the unique title among the now renamed Death Guard of Battle Captain. As the Legion would replace the majority of its losses with the sons of Mortarion's adopted homeworld Barbarus, the noble spirit of its native Terran-born sons would slowly diminish. Seen by many senior men of the Legion as a relic of a bygone age, Garrow would find himself marginalised by his commanders and brother companies. Often referred to as Straight Arrow Garrow, the Legion's disdain for his traditions such as the role of his housecarl, Caleb Arryn, would further increase friction within the Legion. Combined with Garrow's refusal to join the Legion's fraternal organisation, the Seven Pillars Warrior Lodge, the antipathy with his battle brothers would continue to grow. However, Garrow would earn respect from his Primarch Mortarion, much to the chagrin of his fellow ranking officers, First Captain Callus Typhon and Commander Ignatius Grulgor. Following the Yorgul persecution, a war fought against a species of psychically potent Xenos, with the aid of the Sisters of Silence, Garrow would gain recognition from his Primarch for his deeds during battle. Garrow would drink a draught of strong poison with Mortarion, a tradition held by his Primarch after each successful battle to symbolise the Legion's endurance and strength, as it is said that no warrior of the Death Guard could be bested by toxins or decay. Following this ritual, Mortarion would test Garrow's resolve and intentions, asking him why he eschewed the membership of the warrior lodges. Garrow stated that a warrior should not skulk in shadows hiding their intentions from the wider Imperium. Subsequently, Mortarion would offer Garrow the honour of being his equerry during the conclave held upon Horus Lupercal's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. It is here that the Primarchs assembled by the War Master would decide the fate of the Istvan system of planets, a system once conquered by the Astartes, which had now rejected compliance with the Imperium, and thus must be crushed under the War Master's heel. It is here that Garrow's life would change forever. The Astartes from each legion of the Death Guard, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Sons of Horus would be amassed to lay waste to the Isvanians. Turned by the then unknown forces of chaos, Garrow and the Astartes beside him would find abhorrent creatures leading the Istvan forces. Wretched war singers would screech their dirges into the battlefields with deadly effect, their subjugates droning slaves to their whims. Garrow would lead an assault intended to kill the war singer responsible for leading the combatants on Istvan III. During his combat with the Psyker, he would be crushed, sustaining severe wounds to his torso, arm, and right leg. Fortunately for Garrow, his life would be saved due to the intervention of the Emperor's Children, with Chapter Master Eidolon and 10th Company Captain Saul Tarvitz killing the Warsinger and Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile tending to Garrow's wounds. It would not be enough to save Garrow's leg, but he would survive. Fitted with a prosthetic, Garrow would further be ridiculed by members of the Death Guard, deriding him as a cripple unable to lead his company unimpeded. Resentful of his injury, Garrow would demand to be redeployed on Istvan III, but with First Captain Typhon now in command, he would relegate Garrow to rest on the Imperial frigate Eisenstein under the watchful eye of 2nd Captain Ignatius Grulgor. As battle waged on the planet below, Garrow would become restless aboard the Eisenstein. Aware he was being monitored by Grulgor, Garrow would ask his housecarl Caleb to investigate the ship. Feeling unease at the Eisenstein's positioning relative to the planet, conflicting with their orders to prevent ships from fleeing, Caleb would discover the ship had been fitted with Life-Eater virus bombs. Weapons too potent to be fitted to a frigate-class ship, and only authorized to be wielded by the War Master himself. These planet-killing payloads could destroy entire ecosystems and living creatures, and it is said even the Emperor was loath to use them in any theatre of war. Before capture by Grulgor's men, Caleb would be saved by 7th Company Apothecary Merrick Voyan, whom Caleb would confide his findings. During this time, the Eisenstein's crew would observe an unscheduled movement in the battle sector during the first assault of the battle below, a lone Thunderhawk being pursued by Raven-class interceptors. Taking command, Garrow would hail the Thunderhawk. realizing the occupant to be Saul Tarvitz, his old comrade of the Emperor's children, whom helped save his life during the battle with the Warsinger. Tarvitz would issue a warning that the War Master Horus had betrayed the loyal Astartes of the Imperium, claiming that the current battle consisted only of Astartes deemed expendable to the War Master's plans, and that soon they would all perish. Trusting the word of his cousin Astartes, Garrow would command the crew to fire upon the lead Raven interceptor, using its explosion to hide Tarvitz's retreat, relaying to the pursuing Emperor's children warship Andronicus that the Thunderhawk, along with Tarvitz, had been destroyed. Caleb and Voyan would then relay their findings to Garrow and inform him of his brother Legionary's treachery in planning to lay waste to the planet with their deadly payload. Ignatius Grulgor would confront Garrow and his retinue and make his treacherous intentions be known, deriding the Emperor as a man lacking authority and only Mortarion and the War Master worthy of commanding the Death Guard. From here there would be blood. In the ensuing skirmish, Caleb and Grulgor would clash, leading to Grulgor grievously injuring Caleb and firing an errant bolt shell, rupturing one of the Life Eater virus warheads. In an act of valorous sacrifice, Housecarl Caleb Arryn would sacrifice his own life to protect the crew and his master Garrow from the deadly virus. Activating an emergency release switch, Arryn would lock himself, Grulgor, and the other afflicted souls into a compartment, killing them all, their bodies flushed into space to save the ship. Garrow realized that his leg injury had saved him from being on the planet's surface, preventing suffering the same fate. Resolved to inform the Emperor of the War Master's betrayal and that of his brothers, Garrow would lead the remaining survivors of the Death Guard, the 70, and the crew of the Eisenstein to safety. Swearing an oath of moment under Garrow's ancient sword Libertas, the members of the Eisenstein would plan their escape. Even taking aboard fleeing loyalists of the vengeful spirit, Iacton crews of the Sons of Horus, Iterator Kirill Sinderman, Remembrancer Mercedes Olaton, and Euphrati Keeler, the first living saint of the Imperium. Harassed by Captain Typhon's ship, the Terminus Est, the Eisenstein would narrowly escape the Istvan system. Severely damaged, they would nonetheless brave the warp in search of salvation. Within the warp, the foul chaos being Nurgle would interfere, resurrecting Ignatius Grulgor and his warriors to serve under him as the first Plague Marines. Fighting the demon forces of Nurgle, the Chaos Horde would claim the life of the Eisenstein's navigator and set the ship adrift in the warp. Grulgor would also infect Garrow's battle brother Solon Decius with the dreaded disease, Nurgle's Rot. Garrow ordered the ship to make an emergency transition out of the warp, and as they re-entered real space, Grulgor and his men would be drawn back into the warp, unable to exist within the material world. Adrift in interstellar space, the crew of the Eisenstein sent a beacon into the void, hopeful that someone loyal to the throne would find them. Fortunately, they would be rescued by the men of the Imperial Fist stationed aboard the space fortress Phalanx, commanded by Primarch Rogel Dawn. Garrow would seek an audience with the son of the Emperor, retelling the War Master's betrayal and their battles with the forces of fell demons. It nearly cost him his life. Dawn became enraged with the idea that his trusted brother Horus could even conceive of betraying the Emperor. With the aid of Mercedes Olaton's memory coil implants providing proof of the betrayal, Garrow's life was spared as the Phalanx made travel for Terra. Arriving in the Sol system, Garrow and his allies would be held aboard the lunar base Somnus Citadel until they were deemed to be loyal. During this time, Nurgle's Rot completed its foul purpose and corrupted the form of Solon Decius. Birthed and nourished from Decius's resentful nature and misfortune, it transformed him into the greater demon, the Lord of Flies. Massacring Astartes, Sisters of Silence, and mortal men alike, the Lord of Flies would rampage up to the surface of Luna itself, where it would face Garrow in battle. Killing the foul demon filled Garrow with no pride or satisfaction. Garrow cast its spirit back into the warp. He had lost more battle brothers and innocents at the maw of treachery, and unfortunately for Garrow, it would only be the beginnings of his woes. Safe from the forces of chaos for now, Garrow would be given new purpose by by the Regent of Terra, Malcador the Sigillite. His life as a Death Guard was over, for now his purpose would be reconstituted. From dusk unto death, unto sacrifice.
"He cannot protect everyone," said Galor. "He is mighty, but he is no god."
Then the other warrior cocked his head.
"Or is he?"
Garrow said nothing, refusing to be baited. Long before the Siege of Terra had begun, even before the War Master's betrayal, there were those who considered the Emperor of Mankind as more deity than mortal. They had many names: the followers of the Lectitio Divinitatis, Truekind, Imperiads, Lightbringers, and many expressions of their devotion, such as it was. Garrow did not consider himself among any of these groups, but he did believe, he did have faith. It was only when called upon to fully quantify that conviction that words failed him.
"I have faced death many times, against impossible odds, and still I live," he murmured. "There must be a reason. By the throne. Once I was told that I was of purpose. I choose to hold to that still."
He looked away.
"Call it what you will, brother. I care not if you think I am deluded."
To his surprise, Galor gave a rare, if bitter, laugh.
"I would not dare to. And in days as dark as these, who am I to challenge what gives a warrior succor? No, I only sought to know if your attitude has shifted on such matters. I see it has not." "Oh, it has," Garrow corrected, a grim solemnity sweeping over his expression. "My faith has been tested, again and again, but never as gravely as now." He gestured towards the ruins, heaped at the horizon. "Terror burns about us, in such profusion that a single sword, a single bolt gun cannot hope to turn back the fire. I have lent my aid to the palace's defenders wherever I can, wandering between the battlements and donjons, and yet the taint of futility is forever at my back." Galor nodded. "I feel it too."
When Horus's fleet had come, when his ships had darkened the sky, some stirring of martial exhilaration had been reborn in Garrow's twin hearts. He stood with an ersatz kinsman, Garviel Loken, and made ready for battle of such glory that it would be sung of for 10,000 years. But the reality of the grinding, monstrous siege war had burned through that. The great imperious scope of the palace city-state, once the venerated jewel of Terra, had become a hellish crater filled with shed blood and the detritus of brutal war. An inescapable foreboding filled his soul, as if sensing the great cogs of some unseen mechanism turning about him. Garrow felt the fates were aligning in ways he could only guess at. And now, with his lost legion on the approaches, and with his former Primarch marching somewhere among their number, the true power of something he rarely knew gripped him. Fear.
"He is out there,"
said Garrow, voicing the thought.
"Mortarion."
Galor knew of whom he spoke, grimacing around the name.
"Our traitor lord come to plague us anew."
Aye. The legends of the Legiones Astartes are numerous in their deeds of valor, treachery, and martial prowess. Warriors without peer, gifted immense autonomy and power to shift the fate of humanity's destiny, such souls would prove to be both paragons and champions of both virtuous and despicable actions. For today, to mark the second anniversary of the remembrances of the Imperium, we shall elucidate the full account of among the most venerated Astartes to ever fight in the name of the Emperor. The former battle captain of the Death Guard Legion, Nathaniel Garrow. With the renewal of humanity's resolve under the guidance of the Master of Mankind, a new era burgeoned. Resolving to unite mankind's fragmented fiefdoms and empires across the stars, the man known simply as the Emperor began his quest to unify humanity's ancient homeworld into the foundations of his Imperium. The wars of unification, waged by the Thunder Warriors of old, had proven effective at culling the dissidents of Terra, yet had proven unworthy of continuing the Emperor's crusade across the expanse of the galaxy. To bring about a new age of prosperity, a new breed of warriors would be forged and earn the moniker of his Angels. Created to bring compliance to the remnant rebellions and uprisings upon Terra, 20 legions of Astartes had been drawn from the world's populaces to enact the final hammer blow against the detractors of the Emperor. Of such legiones Astartes, the 14th, drawn from the techno-barbarian state of Albia, had earned a reputation clad in armor of marble adorned with a halved skull and black sun. Dusk Raiders they were called. As the red right hand of the Emperor, they in turn had coated their right arm plating in glistening crimson and fought as unstoppable and relentless warriors. Their reputation alone causing their foes to lay down their arms the moment Terra's sun dipped below the horizon. Few dared to oppose such an efficient and deadly force. Among such soldiers, a young man also of Albion heritage rose through the ranks as a stoic and honorable warrior. A man by the name of Nathaniel Garro. Gifted a patrician demeanor befitting a noble warrior of Terra's ancient legends, his pale skin patterned with scars bore a weary countenance and old eyes belying his youth. Earning many plaudits and battle honors for his service as the Legion embarked upon the Great Crusade, the 14th spent over half a century waging war without the guidance of their Genesire. Nathaniel rose to the rank of a respected captain of the Legion and fostered great respect from his peers of brother legionaries for his impeccable service. Forming bonds of great friendship with the captain of the Lunar Wolves, Garviel Loken, during the Crypt campaign against the Greenskins, and captain of the Emperor's Children, Saul Tarvitz, during the Pre-Exor campaign, Garro would regard only the most cherished of his allies as brothers in arms. Considering Saul Tarvitz to be his honor brother for his shared embodiment of the Imperium's ideals, the two Astartes each carved half of the Imperial Aquila into the ceramite of their vambraces. When both clasped their wrists in a show of friendship, the Imperial Aquila would form and symbolize their eternal bond as brothers forged in war. Yet during 854.M41, the Legion's Primarch would be found upon the world of Barbarus. A noxious world once ruled by malevolent necromancers, fate had been unkind to the young Primarch, molded by misfortune, slavery, and morbidity. With the Emperor's intervention, the so-called Pale King of Barbarus would be installed as the rightful leader of the 14th Legion and begin his task of remolding them in his image. A transformation which would contrast with the character of the noble son of Albia. As the Great Crusade continued to wage, with Mortarion installed as the Primarch of the 14th Legion, the Dusk Raiders' culture and heritage began to be supplanted. Recruiting new Astartes solely from Barbarus, the Terrans within the Legion began to dwindle, as 6 of the 7 captains of the battle companies had been replaced with the stock of Mortarion's foster world. Leading the 7th Great Company as its battle captain, a title originally conferred to Garro's predecessor of the 7th Company by the Emperor himself, Nathaniel Garro watched his legion transform into the now Death Guard, derived from the struggle of his Primarch's ascension as the Death Lord. Foreseeing a day when all Astartes of the 14th would be of Barbaran descent, Garro lamented the loss of his legion's warrior creed. Fearing his legion's noble character to be intertwined with the heritage and glories of the Dusk Raiders, their once noble character seemed destined to give way to merciless, cold slaughter. Seen as high-handed for his refusal to abandon his Terran traditions, a rift would begin to grow between Nathaniel Garro and his peers. Nicknamed Straight Arrow Garro by the commander of the 2nd Great Company, Ignatius Grilgor, Nathaniel's rejection to accept offers to join the Legion's Warrior Lodge further compounded the mistrust and disdain of the Barbaran Astartes. Seeing his customs to be holding back the prosperity and growth of the Legion's character, the Barbaran Space Marines openly derided individuals such as Nathaniel's housecarl, Caleb Aaron, whom in turn had failed to succeed in the trials to become an Astartes of the Death Guard. The Death Guard's character further soured with the ascension of the appointment of the title of War Master to the Emperor's chosen son, Primarch Horus Lupercal, with the conclusion of the Ulanor Crusade. Nathaniel's lauded victories during the Jorgal persecution, fighting alongside the Sisters of Silence, earned great valor for his legion, leading to his Primarch to honor Garrow with a celebratory ritual to conclude their campaign. A ritual given to one Astartes for each victory made in the name of the 14th, Mortarion presented 2 goblets filled with deadly toxins, chemical agents, contaminants and viral strains to test the most vaunted Death Guard in their resilience to consuming such poisons. Refusal to drink was a sign of weakness and a slight made against the Pale King, and so Nathaniel Garrow did drink the poisonous concoction derived from sword beetle venom, magenta nervebane, and other unidentified compounds. A sign of respect and fealty to his liege lord for their shared participation in battle, Garrow, once consuming the draught of poison, further proved himself loyal to his Primarch. For despite his peers' contempt, Mortarion bore a great bond of respect for the battle captain of his 7th grade company, even though his continued refusal to adopt his homeworld's creed jarred with his vision for a united legion. Showing Garrow through such a gesture that he valued his loyalty, Mortarion spoke with Nathaniel following their toast to gauge his true loyalties. For unknown to Nathaniel, a plot was brewing within the ranks of his legion. Seeking answers to why Nathaniel had refused to join the Warrior Lodge of the 14th and his dismissal to adopt his legion's new beliefs, the son of ancient Albia could not be swayed from his ideals. A true scion of the Emperor, Nathaniel would sacrifice his life, reputation, and honor in the name of the Imperium and its master, no matter what treachery might seek to sway him. Fueled by his purpose to gather the lost fragments of humanity to the banner of the Imperium and castigate the threats to humanity, Garrow's clear vision for a prosperous future ruled by the master of mankind could not be corrupted. Distrustful of superstitions such as the lodges, and unswerving in his belief that the Emperor alone could hearken a new era for mankind, such proclamations sealed Garrow's fate. Understanding his venerated son to be incorruptible in that moment, Mortarion, though disappointed at the prospect of the death of his battle captain, began his plot to cull the loyalist ranks within his own legion. Appointing Garrow as his personal equerry, Mortarion joined the conclave aboard the now Sons of Horus flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, as the assembled legion saw to the compliance of Istvan extremists. Joining the Emperor's Children's First Company in their deployment to the outermost planet of the Istvan system, a rebellion of unknown origin had erupted upon its surface. Leading his 7th grade company in their battle against the Slaaneshi corrupted forces led by the Psyker entities known as the Warsinger, Nathaniel fought valiantly against his unknown foe. Wounded during the battle, Garrow's injuries included damage to his arm, chest, and the loss of his right leg from below the mid-thigh. Treated for his injuries by the chief apothecary of the 3rd Legion, Fabius Bile, with the intervention of his honor brother, Saul Tarvitz, and the Lord Commander of the Emperor's Children, Eidolon, Nathaniel would not die upon Istvan Extremis. Replacing his severed limb with a bionic prosthesis, Garrow's new augmetic would take time to adjust to the healing stump of his leg. Declared unfit to continue fighting at the head of his 7th grade company by his legion's apothecaries, Nathaniel's injury proved a merciful reprieve from the treachery soon to follow. Ordered by First Captain of the Death Guard, Callus Typhon, to remain aboard the void ship Eisenstein, the captain of the 2nd grade company, Ignatius Grulgor, would covertly be tasked with watching Garrow for signs of treachery by Typhon. In orbit of Istvan III, the 7th Company stood as reserves for the battle taking place upon the surface, centered around its capital, the Coral City. Suspicious of Grulgor's intentions and the ship's change in position to low orbit, as warriors of the Emperor's Children, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Sons of Horus fought the rebellion below, Nathaniel's misgivings would be investigated by his housecarl. Caleb Aaron began to spy on Commander Grulgor until reaching the transport bay of the ship. Discovering crates filled with virus bombs within, Caleb, with the aid of the 7th grade company apothecary, Merrick Voyan, relayed his findings to Nathaniel Garrow. Yet time was against them, as the trap of the traitors would be sprung. Receiving a transmission from a Thunderhawk gunship departed from the 3rd Legion Voidcraft, Andronicus, its trajectory was pursued by a cluster of Raven interceptors. Ordered by the Andronicus to fire upon the Thunderhawk, Nathaniel deferred to his better judgment to hear the transmission being sent by the renegade craft. Hearing the voice of Saul Tarvitz, his honor brother warned Garrow that treachery was afoot. "Horus has betrayed the Emperor," Saul shouted, as he relayed his own findings that the ships in orbit would soon bombard the planet. Divulging his findings to his master, the returned Caleb Aaron and Merrick Voyan explained their discovery to Nathaniel. Realizing with horror the intent of such a cargo, Grulgor's men intended to fire the Life Eater virus bomb payload on top of the Astartes forces currently deployed upon Istvan III. Such deadly payloads were world-killing in their potency and used only during the most dire of campaigns. Firing upon the Raven interceptors to allow for Saul's traversal to the surface of Istvan III, it would not take long until Grulgor intervened. Declaring to Garrow that the Emperor held no authority over the Death Guard Legion, only the War Master and their Primarch Mortarion had the right to command them. Battling Grulgor's men, the Death Guard Astartes fought within close proximity of the virus bomb warheads. Saving Nathaniel's life from a bolt pistol round fired by Grulgor, Caleb Aaron, for his valor, received reprisal from the commander of the Second Great Company. Grulgor hurled his combat knife at Caleb, with the housecarl incurring a mortal wound, yet would not allow for his noble master to die this day. The errant bolt round of Grulgor's pistol ricocheted into the metal bulkhead of a virus bomb warhead, now primed to vent lethal toxins within the Eisenstein. Exhausting the last ounce of his strength, Caleb Aaron hurled himself towards the emergency release switch of the cargo hold, trapping Grulgor, the virus contagion, and the traitor Astartes. Blast shield doors sealed the compartment between Garrow and Caleb as the virus bomb consumed all life within the compartment to agonizing effect. Assembling the remainder of his loyal kin to his side, Nathaniel declared their new mission of paramount import. They must warn the Emperor of the impending betrayal. Betrayed by the traitor Primarchs Horus, Fulgrim, Angron, and their own liege Mortarion, the 70 loyal Astartes of the Eisenstein would not join their fallen kin into damnation. Swearing an oath of moment upon Garrow's legendary blade, Libertas, the 70 dedicated their new purpose to fight and die to allow for their warning to reach the throne world. Allowing another renegade Sons of Horus Thunderhawk gunship to land within the frigate under the command of 3rd Captain Iacton Cruz, his refugees of the Iterator Kirill Sinderman and the Remembrancers Euphrates Keeler and Mercedes Olaton had found their sanctuary under the protection of Garrow. During conversation with Nathaniel, Keeler began to bolster his conviction in the Emperor's divinity, yet he would need more than belief to survive the trials ahead. Fleeing the Istvan system, their path to terror would be hounded by the intervention of the traitors' foul new benefactors. Evading the reprisal of Captain Typhon's flagship, the Terminus Est, the Eisenstein began its treacherous escape from the Istvan system. Sustaining heavy damage from the guns of the Terminus Est, every one of the astropaths aboard perished during the skirmish. The single surviving navigator had been wounded, and their traversal of the Immaterium seemed hopeless, yet under such circumstance, only one option remained. Blindly traversing the warp, the Eisenstein continued its perilous voyage to Terra. Yet within the roiling tides of the Immaterium, the Plague Lord Nurgle looked on with great amusement. Already claiming the souls of the Death Guard to his will, the Chaos God of Pestilence and Entropy saw to the creation of the first Plague Marines. Resurrecting Ignatius Grulgor and his men into the foul undead thralls of his will, the Plague Marine Primus once more attempted to claim revenge against his hated nemesis. Slaying the Eisenstein's navigator and infecting the Astartes Solon Decius with his plague knife, Grulgor's rampage within the vessel would be thwarted by Garrow's order to transition out of the warp. Dissipating with the loss of connection to the Immaterium, the Plague Marines fell once more. Stranded hundreds of light years from any known planet of the Imperium, the now adrift Eisenstein had suffered much, jettisoning the ship's warp drive into space. With its detonation, a powerful shockwave made by its destruction remained their last and only hope of distress. Drawing the attention of the Imperial Fist's flagship, Phalanx, commanded by the Primarch of the 7th Legion, Rogel Dawn, the crew of the Eisenstein had been rescued. Meeting with the Vigilant within the command center of his gargantuan Void Fortress, Nathaniel Garrow, in the presence of the survivors of the Vengeful Spirit, denounced the War Master as a traitor to the Imperium. Erupting in a violent outburst at the insinuation that a son of the Emperor could ever betray their father, Rogel Dawn in his rage came close to ending the life of the battle captain of the 14th. Yet with the testimony of Captain Iacton Cruz and the intervention of Mercedes Olaton's recording implants, Rogel Dawn began to accept the bitter truth that his once noble brother had turned from the Emperor's light. Traversing to the throne world to meet with the Emperor, upon their arrival to the Sol system, the 70 required screening upon the moon of Luna to assess them for signs of corruption. Imprisoned within the Somnus Citadel until their purity could be proven true, the Sisters of Silence watched over their charge until the judgment of the Master of Mankind could be ascertained due to his toil within the ruin of the Imperial Webway. Within the Medicae facilities of the Somnus Citadel, Solon Decius's body fought in vain to resist the corruption of Nurgle's rot. Infected by the wound of Ignatius Grulgor's plague knife, Solon's unimaginable torture continued to weaken his resolve. Seeking any aid to deliver him from the agony that racked his body, the Lord of Decay whispered temptations into Solon's mind. Submitting to the will of Nurgle, Solon's body became possessed by the greater demon known as the Lord of Flies as it began to wreak havoc within the headquarters of the Silent Sisterhood. Transforming into a hideous abomination, the demon killed several sisters and a measure of the Loyalist Death Guard stationed within the Somnus Citadel in its escape attempt to reach Holy Terror. Confronted by Garrow upon the surface of Luna, Nathaniel would attempt to end his wayward battle brother's suffering. Banishing it into the roiling tides of the warp, Garrow's deeds further vindicated his actions as a true loyal servant of the Emperor. Meeting with Malcador the Sigillite alongside the Sister of Silence, Amandera Kendall, the Regent of Terror would appoint the two as his personal agents, forming a clandestine order consisting of men and women of an inquisitive nature. The Emperor had foreseen a terrible future following the conflict that now sought to sunder his empire and required singular warriors to oppose the chaos to follow. Tasked with finding 7 individuals of such a caliber necessary to build the foundations of this new order, Nathaniel, now clad in grey Mark VI Corvus power armor, bearing the sigil of the Regent of Terror, ventured once more into the embattled galaxy. Keeping the battle ornament of his rank as battle captain, a decorative golden eagle sculpted of brass upon his armor's chest and gorget, protecting him from small arms fire, alike to an iron halo, Garrow also received a master-crafted Paragon bolter and a device known as Falsehood, which projected a psycholuminal distortion to allow Garrow to infiltrate war zones undetected. Now a legion of one, Nathaniel Garrow, as the Agentia Primus of the Sigillite, traveled to the world of Calth. Recruiting the Ultramarines librarian Tylos Rubio into his service as his lieutenant, Rubio's use of psychic powers in breach of the Edict of Nicaea had seen him ostracized from the 13th Legion. Swearing an oath of moment upon Libertas, Rubio's induction to the Knights Errant would be followed soon after as the duo intercepted the fleeing vessel, Daggerline, housing survivors of the Istvan Free betrayal. Aiding the World Eater's 12th captain, Mesa Varren, in vindicating his actions as a true loyal son of the Imperium, Varren would be the third to join Garrow's band of outcast warriors. With the aid of Malcador and the latent Luna Wolf Astartes Psyker, Severian, the Knights Errant would quickly grow into a force capable of launching covert operations throughout the galaxy. Inducting the Blood Angels Captain Seron, White Scar Neron, and mysterious Dark Angels Blackshield, known only as the Nemean Reaver, the grey-clad warriors continued their works to organize a force capable of combating the treachery of the Shadow Wars besieging the Imperium. Yet upon the desolate world of Istvan Free, the final warrior to be inducted into Malcador's order would languish among the ashes of his fallen brothers. The catalyst of the Horus heresy now remained as little more than dust and bloodied soil. The sight of virus bombings, orbital bombardments of cleansing flame, and the sight of brothers killing brothers, Istvan Free remained as a graveyard of the lost and damned. However, among the debris and fell plague zombies littering the planet, a solitary Astartes remained. Captain Garviel Loken, the forsaken son of the War Master, had survived the countless atrocities of this barren world, and in a state of treachery-fueled insanity, roamed the planet. Garrow, Rubio, and Varen descended upon Istvan Free, only to find corpses both lain to rest and roaming the ruins of battle. Finding the dignified and preserved remains of the deceased sons of Horus captain Tarik Dorgadan, the knights-errant were set upon by the feral Cerberus of Istvan Free. Defending himself from the wild attacks of Garviel Loken, Nathaniel, with the aid of Mesa Varen, managed to breach the despair and trauma of Cerberus's mind and reached out to the long-dormant, yet noble warrior within. Offering Loken a chance at revenge against his treacherous brethren, within the shadow of the choral city of Istvan Free, Garviel Loken accepted the offer of Nathaniel to join the Knights-Errant. Returning to the moon of Luna, the Knights-Errant continued their missions to delay and cripple the War Master's campaign across hundreds of clandestine missions across the stars. As each contingent of Knights-Errant were dispatched among different assortments of specialists for each mission carried out to meet their expertise, in the downtime between missions, Nathaniel Garrow began to contemplate his purpose within the war effort. Seeking guidance from the revered living saint and former remembrancer, Euphrates Keeler, her miraculous abilities in facing the demonic entities of the warp and devotion to the Lectitio Divinitatis sparked further doubt within Garrow's conflicted mind. An adherent of the imperial truth, Nathaniel regardless still felt moments of what could only be described as faith due to his continued battles survived against impossible odds. Meeting with Katona Tallery upon Terra's Riga orbital plate, the Administratum official had discovered suspicious activities of supply transports and siphoned resources of Terra being transported to Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Uncovering an operation known as Ophrys, Katona sought aid from Garrow in uncovering the mystery behind her suspicions that traitors worked within their midst. Infiltrating the fortress monastery of Titan, Garrow and Tallery discovered a gigantic psychic construct being built within. Confronted by Malcador the Sigillite, the Regent of Terra revealed this secret project to be the culmination of his endeavors with the Knights-Errant, authorized personally by the Emperor. Wary of Tallery's threat to expose the project and forewarn the traitor forces, Malcador ordered Garrow to execute the meddling administrator. Refusing to slay a devout follower of the Emperor's divinity, Malcador would relent and draft her to become the Curator Adepta Primus of the project. Destined to be the headquarters for the Grey Knights chapter following the end of the heresy, the last days of the Knights-Errant approached. Fighting alongside his brother of the 70, Helig Galor, in the years preceding the final advance of the traitors, and further strengthening his bond with Euphrates Keeler, when conferring with the first captain of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund, Garrow discovered that he was not alone in believing that the Master of Mankind was indeed divine in nature. Protecting Keeler from the corrupted Vindicari assassin, Aristide Kell, Garrow's duty to prevent the death of the living saint of the Imperium would not allow for any to harm the symbol of hope to endure the darkness to come. For the final battle to preserve humanity was imminent, a conflict which Nathaniel Garrow resolved to make his final stand. Combating demonic incursions throughout Terra alongside his battle brothers, Nathaniel Garrow once more fought the disgusting form of the Lord of Flies. Beneath the vast white mountains of Terra, Nathaniel looked upon the form of his reborn adversary. Revealing its host to be Garrow's stalwart brother, the apothecary Merrick Voyan, Nathaniel and his men fought with valor, yet incurred casualties. Its host slain, the Lord of Flies continued its rampage by possessing those within its proximity. Attempting to corrupt Mace of Aaron, the World Eater, with a word of farewell to Garviel Loken, detonated a brace of grenades, choosing to die free from corruption rather than live as a slave. With Malcador's intervention of psychic might once more banishing the demon to the Immaterium, despite their victory, the work of the Knights Errant was far from over. Assembling 9 of their number to meet with the Master of Mankind personally, these psychically potent souls would be installed as the founding Grand Masters of the Order of the Grey Knights, and begin their task of building their new chapter upon the moon of Titan. Refusing the honor, Garviel Loken, in his rejection of the appointment to such a role, had chosen to seek vengeance against his own treacherous Primarch, yet Nathaniel Garrow had not been given the opportunity to join his outcast kin due to his lack of psychic gifts. As the 8 Titans of the Grey Knights began their vigil upon the time and space-dilated moon of Titan, Malcador the Sigillite released Nathaniel Garrow from his service. Free to choose his own destiny, Nathaniel, alongside Garviel Loken, led his own band of warriors to face the traitors besieging the walls of the Imperial Palace. Garrow's kill team, designated Strife, alongside Loken's Naismith, Galor's 7th, Endred Haar's Black Dog, Sigismund's Devotion, Thane's Helios, and Bel Sepatus's Brightest. The renegade, outcast, and pilgrim Astartes defended the inner palace from the advances of the traitor assault. Defeating both Captain Falcus Kyber and Ezekar Abaddon's elite Justaeran companies, Garrow came close to ending the life of the first captain of the 16th Legion, despite the losses of Sepatus and Endred during the battle. Nathaniel had survived 1,000 battles and seen the deaths of many vaunted heroes and Astartes, yet even now, a pit of uncertainty knotted in his gut. The Death Guard Legion, his once proud kin, began their assault of the Imperial Palace. His own Primarch Mortarion led the charge, and though Nathaniel had proven capable of escaping the embrace of death time and again, he knew now that he must confront the harbinger of his own demise. Grasping Libertas tight within his hands, Nathaniel Garrow faced death incarnate.
Mortarion!
The warrior in grey called out across the silenced battlefield.
For Terra's sake, and by the will of the Emperor of Mankind, I name you traitor.
Traitor. The last word echoed about the ruins surrounding them, repeating off the broken walls and into the haze of war smoke. Mortarion's smile became brittle, fracturing into a sneer. A swift, stony fury came upon him at the denunciation, indignant rage stealing his limbs.
I have betrayed nothing,
he hissed, answering the whispers in his mind before they could begin anew. The Primarch strode to the edge of the observation gallery and gripped the corroded rail there, tightly enough to compact the metal. He was aware of his warriors in the ranks below looking up at him, eager for his next order, conflicted by his inaction. The shout came again. You are corrupt. You have destroyed what you were sworn to protect. If one shred of what you once were still remains, then show it now. Face me, Gene-sire, if you have the courage.
Garrow.
Typhus uttered the name like a curse.
It appears time has not diminished his arrogance, only nurtured it.
The great growth upon the traveller's back shuddered. The plague swarms nesting within the destroyer hive that shared the legionary's transformed body sensed the warrior's need to make murder, and they wanted to fulfill his desire.
Grant me the right to dispatch, my lord. Say the word. Say it.
For a moment, Mortarion considered the possibility. He need only nod, and Typhus would have his grave wardens gun down the Knight Errant, and they would not kill Garrow with that opening salvo. No, they would likely cripple him, breach his armor, and render him unable to fight. Only then would his death begin, a long and tormented process that might last to the fall of Terra and Throne and beyond. It was a tempting prospect, but as with everything Typhus offered his liege lord, it came with a cost. If Mortarion granted the kill to the first captain, then the sacramental power of Garrow's death would belong to Typhus the Traveller, not the Reaper of Men. Mortarion had learned that in his new, changed existence, the boon of Grandfather Nurgle required sacrifice. His body and those of his warriors had been remade, literally transformed into the undying ideal that was the dark soul of his legion. But the bargain has to be paid for, again and again, and the only coin of value was death. The death of a hero, of a believer. That has great worth. Not just as a murder gift to Nurgle and his Gardens of Decay, but to the corrupted spirits of Mortarion's warriors. The changed way was still fresh upon them, and while many embraced the new flesh, others wavered. With his kill upon his scythe's blade, such a righteous kill indeed, the Primarch would reaffirm his mastery of his legion.
No, he told Typhus. You are denied. Garrow's life belongs to me. Once he pledged it to my name. It is mine to end as I see fit.
In spite of himself, Typhus snorted in derision.
My wardens will obliterate that conceited fool. The Oathbreaker is not worth sullying your weapon. You would have me turn away from a challenge to my name?
Mortarion's rasping voice became flinty.
I question this.
Typhus moderated his tone, but he did not back down.
One legionary calls you to conflict. You gave Garrow more honor than he deserves.
Then he paused, taking a husking, gurgling breath.
Or is it that I do not see your full intent, my lord?
He nodded to himself.
Yes, that's it, isn't it? Garrow has always been a splinter in your eye. He is the Death Guard you could not turn to your will. When the moment came, here's your lapse, your failure.
Belying its name, Mortarion's great war scythe, Silence, cut through the fetid air with a sharp hiss as the Primarch drew it from across his back. Tainted sunlight flashed off the corroded arc of the blade, and before Typhus could pull his own weapon, the cutting edge was pressing against his neck.
Take care how you speak to me, my brother,
intoned the Death Lord.
In times past, I have indulged you. I let myself be blind to your ambitions. But those days are over. Remember your place, First Captain. I meant no disrespect,
said Typhus, unwilling to move even the smallest degree while the blade threatened.
I have always been truthful with you, even if you disliked what I say.
At length, he found the will to back away a step, to distance himself from the weapon's killing arc.
I speak the truth now. It is vanity to answer Garrow's challenge. It is beneath you. Perhaps so, allowed Mortarion. But the decision is mine to make.
He returned silence to its place and spoke again.
These are my commands. Have the Legion stand down and give me fighting room.
Father and son stood upon the battered earth of terror, as both traitors and loyalists looked on. One a paragon of humanity's resolve, enriched in holy light. The other a terrible blight, shrouded in poison mist and fell power. It had been years since the Battle of Istvan III, the benighted sundering of the traitor legions from their righteous bonds and fealty to the master of mankind. Yet here, on this day, in the shadow of the Emperor's grand yet besieged palace, the last of the Dusk Raiders of Terror stood upon the ground of his birthworld. Offering Garrow a chance to rejoin his former legion, Mortarion gifted only suffering should he refuse his kindness. Rejecting such a poisoned chalice from the creature who he had once revered, Garrow raised his sword Libertas aloft. Its crackling light shone like a beacon of hope within the mire of smoke and mist. Its brethren blades, forged prior to the Age of Old Night, wielded by Kusanen of the Valorous, Xal, Vorpal, and Zulfikar, now lost to the ages, its keen edge would test its bite upon the flesh of a prince of abominations. 1,000 enemies had perished by its blade, yet never before had it been raised in anger against a son of the master of mankind. But today, it would. As the two clashed, they would exchange barbed words, yet Garrow remained true to have never broken his oath to his legion and his Genesire. Libertas would shatter under the immense force of silence. The duel ended with the Knight of Grey, left at the mercy of the Pale King. Inky threads of toxicity were already eating into the knight-errant's war gear, and where the scythe met flesh, it was poisoning him, dissolving his veins and nerves. The Primarch watched the shadow of death lengthen over Garrow's form. This time, he would not rise. Pinned in place against the blood-washed rubble, Garrow's body shook as one by one, each of his implants and vital organs began to shut down. His gene-enhanced flesh and bones, the greatest weapons that the Emperor's science had gifted to him, were not immortal. His end was at hand. Nothing could stop that now. What would come next? Abyssal darkness? Or would there be some shining, transcendent moment of clarity as the light faded? To Garrow's surprise, what freed itself within him was a smile. He released a wet, broken chuckle. He understood his purpose now. Everything made clear. "You know this," said Garrow, laboring every last word. "When I die, Mortarion, your humanity dies with me."
"As is my wish,"
intoned the Primarch, tightening his grip on Silence Shaft.
"I no longer care for such concerns."
"Lie," managed Garrow, panting through a blood-filled mouth. "I know truth, hidden in your heart. You lie to yourself. You always have." He gritted his teeth and gave a bitter laugh. "In this moment, you sow the seed of your final defeat." Mortarion hesitated, frozen in place, as Garrow's utterance registered with him. Even now, on the precipice of death, the legionary's words were inescapable. They were undeniable. From somewhere high atop the broken flanks of the Marmax Bastion, a flash of white light blossomed into being, and the drumming rumble of thrusters came like a clarion call. A machine in the shape of a winged bullet blasted itself out of the landing pad and cut a curving turn up and around the fallen tiers of the bastion. Typhus screamed wordlessly, and every projectile on the ground opened fire at once. The gathered Death Guard host bracketed the craft, vomiting bilious fire and lethal ejector into the air. A webwork of crisscrossing rocket shell contrails and ropes of searing tracer clawed after the heavy carrier as it skidded through the smoke, overstressed engines howling as they pushed it towards the sky. Some of the ground fire clipped the fuselage, and it veered wildly to avoid a terminal strike that might bring it down. Then, finding its pace, gaining traction against gravity and drag, their carrier shot towards the distant towers and armored precincts of the inner Imperial Palace. A double peal of thunder sounded as the craft breached the sound barrier and raced away at supersonic velocity. Garrow's hazy, pain-misted vision caught sight of the silver dart as it receded. He knew that Helig Galor was at the controls, with Euphrati Keeler and whoever remained of Kostagar's surviving defenders in his charge.
"She is safe," he gasped. "And you have failed, Mortarion."
Whatever plan the Deathlord had, to take the Saint as his prize for Horus Lupercal, to turn Garrow to the banner of the War Master's heretics, it was now a ruin. And the price of it was the life of the martyr. "I pay the cost," Garrow told himself, "as I was always meant to." This was the purpose towards which Nathaniel Garrow's path had been wrought. The moment in which he placed the existence of the Saint before all else. The moment when he saved her.
"No."
Mortarion's grave rasp rose into a furious snarl.
"Even in your death you hinder me."
"I," he breathed, gathering every last iota of strength still in his body, before the will leaked out into the thirsting dust along with his blood. "I deny you your victory. You will never have what you wish. Such is the fate of Oathbreakers."
Caleb Aaron served as a labor serf of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Failing to become an Astartes of the 14th Legion, Caleb succumbed to the trial of poison thorns and found new purpose as a housecarl of the battle captain of the 7th Great Company, Nathaniel Garrow. Hated by the first captain Callus Typhon and commander Ignatius Grulgor due to his weakness, Aaron suffered the snide remarks and threats of his superior kinsman. Treated with kindness and respect by Nathaniel Garrow, despite much of the Legion's Terran heritage, including his own appointment as housecarl, despised by its members, Caleb found purpose maintaining his captain's power armor and venerated blade, Libertas. Valuing Aaron's counsel and perspective as a mortal of the Legion, Nathaniel entrusted his stalwart companion with observing the strange activities conducted during his injury following the first battles of Istvan III. Uncovering duplicity within their own ranks, Caleb witnessed the Warrior Lodge members of the Death Guard preparing to fire virus bomb payloads upon the Astartes stationed on the surface of the planet. Informing Garrow of the impending betrayal, the loyalist Death Guard of the 7th Company, stationed aboard the frigate Eisenstein, would be confronted by Commander Grulgor. Combat ensued as brother fought brother. The bolter of Ignatius Grulgor aimed at the head of the heroic battle captain of the 7th. Firing upon Grulgor and knocking his aim off course, Caleb's actions would be rewarded with incurring a wound from Ignatius's combat knife. The stray bolt of Grulgor's weapon colliding with the warhead of a virus bomb, Aaron threw his injured body at the emergency release switch of a nearby blast door, sealing himself and his enemies within the confines of the chamber, now filling with virus bomb gases. Perishing alongside Grulgor and his men, Caleb Aaron's actions saved the life of Nathaniel Garrow twice over and allowed for his destiny to be fulfilled as the champion of the Sigillite. Finding a copy of the Lectitio Divinitatis within Aaron's belongings following his death, Garrow began to learn its teachings and question the divinity of the Master of Mankind. Witness to the body of Caleb's reanimation with their traversal through the warp en route to the throne world, Garrow dispatched the grotesque revenant of his noble housecarl. His sacrifice and valor in excess of even the bravest angels of death, his humble yet noble bearing could not be allowed to become a vessel of the malevolent gods of chaos.
Know this,
Vork says in his archaic Gothic, trying his best to be readily understandable.
your chapter's gene seed will be destroyed by my hand. None will be taken, none will be defiled.
By now, Zedias is running. He throws himself, body and soul, into the first strike. His Thunderhammer smacks hard into Exact, and the blow is shuddering, one that even Vorks has to work hard to brace against.
Traitor!
Zedias hisses, his voice distorted by the distilled venom of the betrayed.
The bodies of your warriors will not be mutilated.
Vorks continues quietly, throwing Zedias off and ramming the scythe's heel at him.
Those taken alive will have honorable deaths.
Zedias is fast. He is powerful, intelligent, and precise. Another strike cracks Exact away, and the Chapter Master powers into the opened gap, landing a gauntleted punch on Vorks' breastplate. "The throne endures!" Zedias roars. "Terra endures!" Vorks has to battle harder now. Containing this inferno is difficult.
The enemies of the slain will be recorded,
he says, straining to match the heft and velocity of the Thunderhammer strikes.
That is the kind of immortality, a better kind than the one you were promised.
They rock and swing around one another. Vorks is the greater in stature, a swollen creature of the god, and Zedias has to push himself to the limit just to make contact. The Chapter Master is already wounded from many earlier fights. Vorks can see the infections pulsing their way around his body, but somehow it doesn't slow him. "The light will come again!" Zedias thunders, and that, of all that has been claimed or boasted, is a genuine sorrow. It will never come again. There has not been light, genuine light, for 10,000 years. Vorks should know, he witnessed it. The original blaze of hope being extinguished by the doomed War Master at the behest of gods he now serves. So, this pain must end. This delusion must end. Better to prosper in darkness than batter away at some false dawn like a shroud moth on a lantern. The final movement is neither fast nor deceptive. It is just unstoppable. Vork's thrusts his scythe point first, turning his hands and wrenching the curved blade upwards. It hooks under Zodias' breastplate, bites deep, and keeps on going, bursting his primary heart and slicing open his lungs. Vork's heaves, and the chapter master is hoisted from his feet. Vork's twists, holding him up, feeling the blood gush down the shaft and splash on his gauntlets. Zodias spasms, struggling to make his limbs work, to fight back, to control the hammer that he still grasps tightly. Unbelievably, for a moment, he almost makes it. He almost gets in a final blow. Then, inevitably, he fails. His arm goes limp at last, and the thunder hammer crashes to the ground. His helm is the last to drop, held shiveringly rigid to the end. Gently, Vork's lets the body down. He pulls Exact's blade out slowly, doing no more damage to the already ruined armor than necessary. Zodias collapses, his head lolling. Vork's bows stiffly over his corpse and offers him the old salute, the one that the Barbarans used to offer the honorable slain in the days before decay ate its way through all the old protocols. Vork's serves as the Chaos Lord of the Lords of Silence during the era Indomitus. A Barbaran by birth, whose years of service within the Death Guard Legion earned him much prestige in the eyes of his Primarch, Mortarion. Never would this ancient warrior forget his debt to the Pale King for liberating his homeworld from the tyranny it endured, nor recruiting him from the first aspirants of his homeworld stock. Promoted to the honorary rank of Siege Master, which unlike those of the Iron Warriors Legion, bore the pedigree of commander of his legion's fleet. Vork's willingly broke his oaths to the Imperium with the dawn of the Horus Heresy, bearing no loyalty to Terra, nor its ruler. Fleeing into the Eye of Terror alongside his traitorous kindred with the death of the War Master, Vork's went on to command his own warband Victorium of his legion, the Lords of Silence, for millennia, to better spread death and contagion across the stars. Believing Nurgle to be the only true godlike being in existence, Vork's led his bands of unbroken Astartes and unchanged mortal auxiliaries in its name. His repulsive flagship, Solace, renamed of the Undying Valor, forged during the 34th millennium to serve as part of Battlefleet Archon. Over 30,000 ratings corrupted in service to the Lords of Silence with the corruption of the Coronus-class Grand Cruiser, alongside his lieutenants, Captain Garstag, Biologus Putrefier Slurt, Tallyman Philemon, Plague Surgeon Clado, and Warband Champion Dragon, all fought beside 600 of their brethren to end the suffering of all via an act of ultimate extinction. Allying with Abaddon the Despoiler during the 13th Black Crusade, aiding Kosselak's the Forsworn's assault of the Forge World of Agrippina. Though repelled by the stalwart defense of the Cadians, the Lords of Silence would enact their vengeance upon another bastion of the Imperium. The warp drives of the Solace damaged during their battle against the Iron Shades chapter of Astartes. With their return to the Plague Planet, once known of Eleofarda, the sublime soul garden of the Eldar, Mortarion would reveal his grand scheme to enact vengeance. Venturing to his personal realm, Hope's Revenant, to record the casualties of his warband within the pages of his nameless tome of remembrance. Vork's had written at time for days, weeks, or even months without end, until his record-keeping had been revised. Called to attend the grand meeting of the Death Guard Legion's commanders by Slough of the Death Shroud after 8 weeks of transcription, within the manse of the Prince of Decay, Vork's would hear the words of his Primarch. Having met with Abaddon the Despoiler, who had made pilgrimage to each demon Primarch with news of his greatest campaign's fallout, though Mortarion had not anticipated the birth of the Great Rift, none could deny the acumen of the runt of the War Master, nor his Black Legion's deeds. Foreseeing the return of the Avenging Sun to the fold of the Imperium, Mortarion would not allow his dull brother to achieve resurgence unscathed, forewarning Vork's that soon the Death Guard Legion would muster at Ultramar to despoil its many worlds. Callous Typhon railing at the decision to assault Ultramar rather than the Throne World itself, though the Traveler would invite Dragon aboard the Terminus Est in attempts to turn his ambition to ally with that of the Black Legion. For now, the champion of the Warband stifled his schemes to defy the Siege Master. The Lords of Silence, capturing the veteran Astra Militarum captain, Dantine, from the agri-world of Nagian's planetary defense force, Tallyman Philemon carved the mortal's heart from his chest and corrupted the mortal to the Warband's will. Vork's presenting such an organ to Dantine, terrorizing him to see the surgeon's scars upon his chest. As the veteran slowly corrupted into the form of a poxwalker, the Lords of Silence allowed the shambling wretch to roam Solace in search of doomed salvation. allying with Dark Apostle Morjalchek's chapter of the Wordbearers Legion, the Weeping Vale, during the siege of the homeworld of the White Consul's chapter of Space Marines. This bulwark of the Segmentum Pacificus bore only a skeleton task force to defend its domains. Using Dante's knowledge of his former master's fiefdom to better invade their homeworld, demons and mortals beheld his visage with disgust as a soulless husk of his former self. Descending upon the White Consul's 4th Company, easily overwhelming the Praetorian Guard and planetary defense forces. With victory close to being achieved, the Weeping Vale betrayed the Lords of Silence in efforts to sacrifice the populace to summon 3 greater demons to aid in their total seizure of the planet. Vorx slaying Chapter Master Simar Zadias during his defense of the Vigilia Carceris Geneseed Vaults. Though saving the life of Clado, the Siege Master would reveal his knowledge that the Plague Surgeon was responsible for the Solace's warp drive malfunction. Ending the life of Clado before turning his attentions to the perfidious Wordbearers, Biologus Putrefier Slurt would poison Sabatine's population by order of Vorx, transforming them into plague zombies, denying the Sons of Lorgar the souls needed for their ritual sacrifice. Overwhelming the Weeping Vale's forces, now vastly outnumbered by the followers of Nurgle, though Morjalchek managed to flee the now demon world of the Plague God, the Master of the Weeping Vale would doubtless harbor retribution in his soul. Sabatine transformed into a facsimile of the Plague Planet, causing Vorx to question whether to remain as its sovereign or rejoin his legion's advance to Ultramar. None know what ambitions the Siege Master may harbor, as his warband swells with power. It was all so fascinating. A new world, opening up like a budding flower, and all within his grasp. Zadal Crozius breathed it in, tasted it, felt it. His body responded, soaking up every new sensation, absorbing it all, feeling things that he had no words to describe. The sky was dark grey, hanging heavily with smog. The earth was black, choked with ash. Every surface, every brick and block, was coated with filth. And yet, if you knelt down, pushed your helm close enough, you could see the variation there. The tiny glints of crystalline carbon, the movements of insects across the dirt, still struggling on despite the poisons everywhere. Crozius would reach out with a finger, toying with them for a moment, then crushing their glossy shells. He had been an apothecary before. Back in the world that had been dull and dutiful, he had spent his time patching up lacerations and repairing bones. He had thought himself content with that, at the time. A Space Marine was an astonishing thing, capable of self-repair in all but the most catastrophic circumstances. The warriors of the 14th Legion were exceptional even by those high standards, having made a virtue of extreme physical endurance. The ones who had come from Barbarous had set the pace, having lived in a world of poisons for so long as anyone could remember. But the Terrans had caught up fast. The message had come right from the top, from the Primarch, repeated over and over. You are my unbroken blades. You are the Death Guard. In hindsight, Crozius wondered how he had ever really taken pleasure in that old life. True, the position had been an honored one, the apothecaries of the 14th, almost like the Tech Marines of the 10th, charged with watching over the Legion's jealously guarded specialisms. But his subjects had been so dour, so relentless, so uniform. They had never smiled at him, nor offered thanks when he had stitched them up and sent them back to the front. There had been a cloud over them all, a kind of heaviness, dull as stone, turgid as oil. Now though, he limped across the broken ground, his boots sinking deep into sucking clay. Pain flared with every movement, but it was interesting pain, something he could reflect on and marvel at. His body, once such a source of pride, was falling apart. His muscles were loose, his skin sallow. When he swiveled, his armor complained, already beginning to fail. Rust had crept across the face of his plate's metalwork, spidery and multi-hued, and he no longer scoured it off. Better just to let it all degrade, to slide down into a greasy mass. You could take real pleasure in that. The release, the freedom from all that endless drudgery. Now his mind worked differently. He regarded his fellow battle brothers and saw that they were changing too. It was almost childlike, this emergence into a new world, each one of them treading carefully, discovering slowly what they had been turned into and what they might yet become. So appropriate that it was taking place here, on the very world where everything had started. The Legion had spread out across the galaxy, waging their dreary war over 200 years, and were now back again, improved, released, on the cusp of marvels beyond imagination. The term apothecary was no longer really suitable, he thought. Something better would have to be concocted to reflect more closely the biological explorations that were now possible. For now, though, the old title would just have to do. Zadal Crozius served as a member of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A veteran apothecary of the 14th Legion, responsible for the safeguarding of his kinsman's health, though Zadal initially sought to cure his brethren of their afflictions, the insanity of warp corruption eventually took hold of his mind. Defending the Lionsgate spaceport during the Siege of Terra, following Mortarian's banishment by the Warhawk, Jagatai Khan, Crozius contacted First Captain Typhus to assume command of the Legion, abandoning the war zone, with no Primarch to lead his men. Listening to the voice of the grandfather as it seeped into his mind, whispering lies laced with promises of power, Zadal Crozius abandoned his name following his surrender to Nurgle, assuming the title of Necrozius in its stead. His psychic talents burgeoning as he assumed the role of a Chaos Sorcerer, the so-called Hand of Nurgle pursued the arts of necromancy and demonic arcana in deference to his prior noble calling as a healer. Gathering despondent members of the Death Guard into his own warband, the Apostles of Contagion, Necrozius forsook his oaths to Mortarion, pledging his loyalty to the Plague God alone. Resentful of Typhus for his actions which condemned the Death Guard Legion as unwilling thralls to the grandfather, for millennia, the Apostles of Contagion and Harbingers of the First Captain have fought one another in open conflict, committing atrocities such as the blight of the Eldari Maidenworld of Karol, though numerous reports cited Necrozius' end by the blades of the Assassinorum or unnatural infernos cast by the exile, Arzek Ahriman. His epitaph as the Undying is well earned. Fused to his ruined panoply of both Mark IV and 5 patterns of power armor, wielding a rusted force spear of unknown providence, the plague bolts fired from his bolt pistol, believed to be of his own invention, unleash virulent biological agents across the battlefield. Adorned with a blasphemous banner which displays the sigil of his warband, Necrozius' bloated form is festooned with harvested trophies and totems wrought from his campaigns, said to bolster his psychic abilities. Raising armies of plague zombies, using the arts of the Curse of Unbelief to bolster his demonkin and Astartes' forces, the most devastating onslaught of such an army of detritus would be made during the Siege of Rax, a century following the warband's last recorded campaign. Descending upon the Armory world during 813.M41, for 17 years, the Apostles of Contagion spread plague and disease across the planet, using fell rituals and exhumation of fallen warriors. Aiding in the deaths of over 14 million loyal guardsmen and entire native population of 8 million souls, Necrozius withdrew from the Siege of Rax, content with the spread of the grandfather's disgusting gifts. But he had already died so many times, he could no longer count them. Over and over, he had felt his heart stop, with a jolt so painful that he would have screamed if he could have somehow hauled the breath in. That was what it had been like in the void, for that period of time that had felt longer than eternity. Perhaps it had been longer. Perhaps a part of him was still out there, even now, dying, and then living, and then dying again. At times he'd not been able to tell the states apart. They had merged together, just one long stretch of agony. And now it was over, in a manner of speaking, but he was still somehow stuck in that halfway state, as if his soul had never truly escaped the destroyer, caught in its vice and gently crushed into pliant mush. In other respects, though, he had gone back to being something that he recognized. He could carry a weapon again, trudge towards a horizon, kill for his Primarch. He could follow an order, give an order. He was a soldier, just as he had been ever since his youth on Barbarous, a fighter against tyranny. So Kaifer Morag was utterly transformed, and so utterly unchanged the Eternals were all rearranged. But his mind was much as it ever had been. He could no longer remove his encrusted armor, true, and he could no longer breathe without wheezing, nor blink without leaving lines of mucus across his eyeballs. But he remained himself, loyal equerry to the Primarch, servant of the Legion, observer of deeds for the histories that would one day need to be written. He lifted his heavy head, feeling the servos in his decaying battleplate catch and snick. Everything was dusty. The ruins roiled with it, running in tear lines from mortar wounds, silting up across the foundations of half-toppled buildings in grey-black dunes. You couldn't see far in all that. A mortal might peer out for a few dozen meters. He himself could see a bit further, all through the film of green that colored everything for him now. He could make out the ruins of Corbinic Guard in the far distance, a slumped head of masonry, still hot from all the munitions that had been hurled at it. Closer in, a few kilometers off, the walls of the Colossi Gate stood, blackened, damaged, but stubbornly there. In between those peaks were the blasted lands, the flattened carcasses of old dwellings and factories. A maze of low-lying rubble heaps. Even as he watched, something shimmered in the half-light, gauzy and translucent. A face emerged from the dust clouds, briefly elongating, slipping over itself, solidifying into a distended, slack-jawed creature that popped and wobbled its way into full being. It shuddered, slipping in and out of reality, before slithering off into the shadows, looking for something to gorge on. Morag still hadn't got used to them, the demons. Once, he would have been repelled by even a sniff of such horrors, but now they were everywhere, sliding across the open doorways, capering down bombed-out streets. They rose up from the soil and squirmed down from empty window frames. Some were silent, some whispered all the time. Some took the form of animals, so that you could never be quite sure what was real and what was not, until you got close enough to sniff the wrongness. Others were gigantic and repellent, lurching and shifting through the dust clouds, towering over the troops below. They all had trouble, still. The closer they got to the great wards, the worse it was for them. Even now, even after so much pain had been piled onto the Emperor's psychic barricades, they couldn't quite cross the final threshold. They still needed flesh and blood for some things, but that wouldn't take long now. Every wall of the long inner palace perimeter was under attack. The bombardment never ceased. The pressure never slackened. What paltry territory remained in the hands of the enemy was being compressed, wrung out tighter and tighter, until it would burst apart like rotten fruit. Then the demons would truly go to work. Then they would run amok, unfettered, feasting on whatever living souls remained in the debris. On some days, when Morag thought about it, he became morose and sluggish, remembering when his purpose had been to hunt down monsters, rather than enable them. And on other days, when combat roused the cold coals of his soul's furnace, he wished for nothing more than to see it, to relish it, to grin in a stupor as the lesser children of the god did their holy work. Typhus, they had to call him Typhus now, preached that doctrine endlessly, telling them all that this was what they were always destined to become, and never to regret the sacrifice. For even when they had been waifs and wretches on Barbarous, the god had always had them in his mind, and had always known they could be something greater. Morag smiled at the memory. Greater? In some ways they were. So few things truly hurt him now. Bolt shells would punch through his armor, blades would bite deep into his addled flesh, and he would recover from it all so quickly, just as it had been in the warp death to life, life to death. And yet, how could he ignore the visible price of all that power? The way his skin hung slack from his wasted muscle, the way his pores oozed black gunge, the way everything he touched seemed to thicken up with corrosion and start to fester. If this was a gift, then it was a strange one. If it was a reward, then its taste was bitter. Kaifer Morag served as a member of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A Barbaran native who fought by the side of his Primarch Mortarion during their conflict against the necromancer overlords of their homeworld. Morag's service as a member of the 24th Breacher Squad saw to his elevation as the personal equerry to the Pale King during the Horus Heresy. Corrupted by the Destroyer Plague, released by Callous Typhon during the Legion's traversal through the Warp to Holy Terror,
Morag's body fused with his armor as his form mutated into an abomination. Fighting beside Typhus and Grimus Calgaro during his Legion's assault of the Lionsgate spaceport, his loyalty to his gene-sire superseded his hesitance to accept the gifts of the Plague God. Confronted by the demon known as the Remnant, Morag journeyed through space and time as the entity revealed the moment when Mortarion surrendered his Legion to the clutches of chaos. Hateful of what he had become, Morag regardless fought the White Scars during the defense of the Lionsgate spaceport, and bore witness to the duel wherein the Warhawk, Jagatai Khan, banished the Reaper of Men into the Warp. Rallying the Death Guard with the loss of his Primarch, Kyver pledged his will to the Plague God. Escaping the siege, his fate hereafter remains unknown.
"Declare yourself, Black Shield," he said dryly. "I would have your name before I kill you."
The warrior ignored his demand. "You wear the armor and you carry the scythe. Has your master given you leave to have a mind of your own then?" Korak listened carefully. The warrior spoke with a strange inflection, but there was something else. The dour snag of barbarian rhythms, perhaps. This one evidently knew what Korak was, and why it was unthinkable that he would be on Argavian alone.
"I always had a mind," he replied, "but not always a tongue. I took it back, and it has served me well. I ask again, and I will not do so a third time. Give me your name."
The warrior reached up and, awkwardly, grabbed his gorget seal and twisted the helm free. The hiss of escaping atmosphere was tinged with green and boiled away like steam. When it cleared, the face revealed was a mess of scabs and scars, knitted together with metal pins that threaded through hollow cheeks. He could breathe, he could process the sickened air, and still stand steady. So surely he was a Death Guard under all that ebon plate. One of the old Legion yet. "I am named Chrysos Morturg," the warrior announced, without pride. Free of the Vox Grill's distortion, his accent was neither of terror nor barbarous. "I once led destroyers to war under the 14th Legion's banner. Perhaps you saw me do so on Istvan III, or perhaps you turned your face away on that day, unable to bear the shame." So that was it. These hunters were not led by one of the loyal legions at all, but the disloyal dregs of a disloyal muster, the unworthy and the backward-looking, all of whom should have been long since culled.
"You were there,"
said Korak, a little wonderingly. He had seen the orbital barrages, the waves of landings, and found it hard to countenance the idea that anyone could have lived through that, not even the most doggedly stubborn.
"How did you survive?"
Do not be foolish. No one survived. Korak hesitated, then snorted a dry laugh.
"Yet here you are, hunting us down for revenge. It eases your pain, this, does it?"
But Mortarg made no move. "I have slain 100 of my former brothers already," he growled. "Every time I felt their blood on my gauntlets, my strength grew. And yet you are different. Why are you here, Death Shroud? How can you be here?" As he listened, a faint, terrible hope kindled in Korak's mind. They were battle brothers of a kind still, the two of them, sundered only by time and temperament. Perhaps that hope was unworthy, a last strand of weakness, but it would not quite die within him.
"What I was, I no longer am,"
Korak said.
"I watched the killing plains of Istvan, and I never turned my face away, for all who perish there deserve to die, at least, as I fought then. And so I remained under the shadow of our master, as his guardian-elect, and I followed him into the void, and we began to burn the Imperium from within."
He paused, thinking back to his second treachery, that had been the harder of the two.
"But then came Molech. You know Molech. Maybe even you will have heard of it. The things I saw there, the dead raised and the living slain. My own brotherhood sacrificed in a ritual of blasphemy to raise an abomination. And on that day, I saw that all our master had ever taught us, all the screeds against the witch and the magics of old night, were as nothing. And if his vows had come to naught, what use were mine?"
He raised one gauntlet to his chest in salute. just as he had done from the earliest days of his fealty.
So I took my name back. I found my voice once more. Now I have no master, and all swords are turned against me.
Morturg looked skeptical. You still wear the colors?
Mortarion changed. I did not. I am still of Barbarous.
Slowly, as if comprehending a subtle truth, Morturg nodded. And you would kill our father, were you to see him again?
In a heartbeat.
And that is your intention, to find a way?
It is all I live for.
Veteran Sergeant Korak served the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Standing as among Primarch Mortarion's honor guard, the Death Shroud, this Barbaran aided in the slaughter of the loyalist remnants of his legion during the Istvan Free atrocity. Placing his allegiance to the creed of his homeworld and legion above that of the Emperor, his bitter fighting made against the salamanders of the Istvan V Dropside massacre pushed his squad to the limits of their endurance. Yet after the events of the Battle of Molech, Korak's intolerance of witchcraft would force him to defect from his legion. The Pale King's use of sorcery a heresy too great to ignore. Gathering a band of like-minded kinsmen to break away from their legion, Korak's warband captured the Voidcraft, Gogola, and fled from Mortarion's fleet. Vowing to slay his former liege, these renegades refused to abandon their heraldic colors, seeing themselves as the only true reminders of their once glorious legacy. Set upon by a Black Shield fleet within the Leop system, which targeted their lines, alongside his battle brothers, Hesh, Ergain, Turgala, and Lythas, Korak abandoned the Gogola, descending upon the planet of Argavian within a Stormbird gunship. Hunted down until only himself and Hesh remained, Korak challenged the leader who pursued them, Chrysos Morturg. A fellow survivor of Istvan Free, who had fought on the side of the Loyalists, the largely bionic husk who had survived even the Rangdan genocide, remarked that no Death Shroud was permitted to speak. Explaining that his vows had been broken, now pledged to a heretic, Morturg attempted to bring the renegade Death Shroud into the fold of the Loyalist Black Shields, to no avail. Hesh firing upon Morturg to reveal his body to be a Psyker projection, Korak enraged at the use of sorcery would not brook an alliance with any Witchkin. Proclaiming that no Loyalist Death Guard had truly survived the betrayal of Istvan Free, Korak's refusal to surrender his last holdout of integrity to a cause would see to his end. Slain by Morturg, Korak's remark that the former destroyer was only a ghost would be countered. As are you, brother. As are we all. A chilling footnote to mark the death of a warrior who had given everything to his legion in exchange for betrayal, heresy, and corruption.
Huron Fal served as a venerable dreadnought of the Death Guard Legion's 2nd Company during the Great Crusade. Records of Huron's interment within his dreadnought sarcophagus have been lost to time, yet fragments of his deeds remain. During the Battle of Iota Harologai, Fal alongside the battle captain of the 7th Company, Nathaniel Garrow, and Silent Sisterhood would battle the Jorgol Xenos. Felling the cybernetic warriors, the Death Guard would purge the hatcheries of the colony Void Ship before the Jorgol's brood could spread across the system. Revered by his battle brothers within the 14th, despite his stalwart service to his legion, Fal would be marked as untrustworthy during Mortarion's gambit to betray the Emperor. Deployed upon the surface of Istvan Free during the War Master's campaign to quell the rebellion of the once compliant world, Huron Fal would fight alongside his stalwart friend, Captain Ulis Temeter, as they enacted the Imperium's judgment upon the populace. For their unerring loyalty to the Emperor, the Death Guard loyalists would be betrayed by their Primarch and kin as the War Master's fleet bombarded the planet. As the Isvanian rebellion withered, Life-Eater virus bombs would descend upon the loyalist forces and consume every soul subsumed by its plumes of noxious gas. Attempting to shelter themselves within bunkers upon Istvan Free's surface, Huron would shepherd as many survivors of the 14th as possible to safety. Protected from the virus due to his dreadnought chassis, Huron would refuse to join the safety of the bunker whilst his battle brothers remained on the surface, Temeter would order the bunkers to be sealed as the bombs unleash their payloads and become infected with the virus's decaying embrace. Gathering the dying captain within his arms, Huron Fal would reveal his own armor's systems to be breached and accept his fate to die alongside his friend. His duty as a veteran to protect his battle brothers achieved to the best of his ability, Huron would state,
"We'll go together then, shall we?"
Huron Fal asked, embracing Temeter's body to him, moving swiftly away from the bunker. It took every last effort from Temeter to nod. Blinded now, he could feel the tissues of his eyes burning and shriveling in his head, the soft meat of his lips and tongue dissolving.
This death is ours. We choose it. We deny you your victory.
As his dreadnought chassis exploded, Huron would end the suffering of his brother's rapidly decaying body. Defiant until the end, Huron would choose death by his own hand rather than the traitors. His service to his battle brothers and the Emperor unwavering, even in the face of death.
Mortarion eyed Scorval's right arm. The limb ended just above the wrist, the stump hidden behind a greasy, blood-stained bandage. The injury was only a week old, a trophy from the closing stages of a fight against a dozen killbeasts. One of them had bitten off Scorval's hand and swallowed it, but the warrior had still managed to rip out the monster's throat and drown it in its own blood. What in the name of all that is cold? Another familiar figure came to them through the throng, his broad face switching from a manic grin to a worried frown, and then back again. "Hunda, did you leave something behind out there?" "No jokes, Jurel," Scorval shot back, cradling his injured arm. "I am not in the mood." "A killbeast tried to make a meal of him," Mortarion said levelly. "I believe he is so unpalatable that it choked to death." "Now you mock me too?" Scorval's expression fell. "Ah, I understand why it died," said the new arrival. "You have bitter blood, Hunda. I've always said so." Mortarion clapped Scorval on the back. "That's a good name for you. You'll have to keep it." Hunda Scorval served the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Among the first of the Legion to be drawn from the aspirants of the Death Guard's newfound homeworld, Barbarus, Scorval followed in the footsteps of his Primarch Mortarion to wage war across the stars. Having perceived his Genesire as the liberator of his downtrodden people from a young age, whilst fighting the Overlord Xenos at his Primarch's side during the emancipation of his homeworld, Hunda proved himself to be a capable warrior alongside veterans of Barbarus such as Kalas Typhon and Durak Rask. Surviving the battles waged against the oppressors of his people, with Scorval's ascension as a space marine, he would prove a valiant and noble companion to his lord. Honored with carrying the standard of the First Company's 19th chapter into battle, a skirmish with the Eldar upon the world of Neverlight resulted in a grievous wound. Interred within a dreadnought sarcophagus, his service as a Contemptor proved to be exceptionally deadly in combat. Siding with the traitor rebels during the Horus Heresy, the so-called Bitterblood fought alongside his Primarch at the vanguard of the Battle of Istvan III. His chassis badly damaged by the Loyalist resistance, with the conclusion of the atrocity, Scorval's dreadnought would be repaired, allowing for his deployment in the subsequent Dropside massacre of Istvan V. Surviving the second catastrophic engagement, Scorval would continue to stand at the vanguard of the Pale King's forces until their push towards Holy Terror with the conclusion of the war. Present during the Death Guard's traversal through the warp, orchestrated by their conniving first captain, Kalas Typhon, the Bitterblood watched his peers transform as they were gripped by the plagues and infections of their new benefactor, Nurgle. Reeling from the horror of the transformation of the Junior Astartes, Raheb Zuriak, with his containment of the infection, his Primarch would observe the fell ruin that had befallen the Space Marine and Labor Serfs. Witnessing the form of more horrific mutilations than even those inflicted by the overlords of Barbarus, Mortarion observed the still-living Astartes, slick with putrescence as he spat gobbets of phlegm, ripe flies and maggots burgeoning from the lesions of his skin as it sloughed from his bones. Apothecary Crozius remarked that Zuriek was infected with all known diseases at once, and despite the failure of many of his organs and rupture of his secondary heart, he was a vector for further plagues. As the warrior cried bloody, black tears, Mortarion felt an emotion he had seldom ever felt: pity. Entering the chamber, Mortarion ended the agonized warrior's life, remarking, "You are my loyal son. You have served the Death Guard with honor. You need suffer no more. Rest now." Yet despite ending his Gene Son's life, the body refused to submit to endless rest, convulsing and stumbling as it tore the knife from its chest like a crazed marionette. Nurgle would not allow his pawn to truly die, and the Pale King realized that he could not grant peace from this state of undeath. The Bitterblood looked on at the abominable state of his cherished kin, at the disgusting fate which he would never wish upon his most detestable foe. The fate of Hunda Skorval henceforth remains unknown, the record of the corruption of his cherished friend, epitomizing the tragic downfall of his legion. "Hunda!" The Bitterblood heard the whelp calling his name, and with irritable slowness, the old veteran allowed himself to come fully awake. His implanted autosensors flickered into action, the visual, infrared, ultraviolet, and terahertz wave phases all overlapping into a single mass of input.
Who speaks?
The question grated through the sour air of the arming chamber, issuing out of the vocoder module across the front of his armored form. The barrel-chested Contemptor Dreadnought shifted on his support frame, making the iron girders creak. He flexed the thick fingers of his combat fists and turned an optic towards the legionary standing in the chamber's doorway. A line Death Guard, but his sigils were those of Captain Calgaro's cohort, not of the First Company. "It is I, Zuriek." The young warrior's reply seemed labored, almost as if he were out of breath, as impossible as that was for a Genhans legionary.
Raheb!
The Bitterblood generated a rough, sawtooth noise that was as close as he could come to a chuckle.
What are you doing here? It has been too long, young one.
The humor faded.
Is something amiss?
Zuriek didn't answer, and instead, he made sharp gestures to the serfs and mechomenials who had been in the midst of performing a maintenance cycle on the venerable veteran's iron body. They took the hint and left quickly, leaving the two Death Guard warriors alone. "Calgaro told me to seek you out," said the legionary at length. "We both agreed if anyone aboard the Terminus Est can be asked to have an honest eye on this ship, it would be Hunda Skorval." The Bitterblood laughed again.
An honest eye on this ship, or its commander? I'll warrant you wish to know more about Typhon's intent than that of his vessel.
Aye, that is the truth. Zuriek halted, leaning heavily against a guardrail. "For Blade's sake, why is it so infernally hot in here?"
What say you?
The veteran checked his aura scan, but the ambient, atmospheric readings came back with normal ranges. Zuriek was still speaking. "You've been attached to Typhon's command since he took his splinter fleet and went on his sojourn. Calgaro has his questions about what happened during the first captain while he was away, and there are few we could trust to be..." He faltered briefly, as if losing his way. "To be forthright, you are among that number."
I know little I can tell you,
the veteran admitted, shifting his heavy frame against the safety restraints that held him in place.
Typhon had little use for me. I think he kept me down here because he knows I think he's an upstart. I knew him at the beginning, Raheb, just as I know you, before you were uplifted to the Legion.
He trailed off, although all that remained of his flesh was interred in a plasteel coffin at the heart of the Contemptor's powerful cybernetic mechanism. The Bitterblood still remained more human than machine, and a pang of concern cut through him as he scanned Zuriek's biosigns. The young warrior's flesh was ruddy and filled with oily sweat, and the veteran immediately recognized the signature effects of legionary internal implants operating over capacity. Even at a remove, he could tell that Zuriek's preomnor, Ulitic kidney, and Laraman's organ were all engaged in fighting something within him.
Lad,
He said sharply, as Zuriek's attention drifted away into the middle distance.
are you injured?
On the sub-channel Voxlink, the Bitterblood was already transmitting a priority request for an apothecary.
What has sickened you?
I don't know. Zuriek pawed at his gauntlets, sluggishly pulling them free to let the metal gloves clatter to the deck. This fatigue came upon me suddenly, as I moved down ship to find you. The legionary took a step and wavered abruptly, as if he had been struck in the gut.
Ah,
The Bitterblood's concern overrode his decorum, and he broke himself free of the safety locks, rising to advance on the other Death Guard.
Raheb, look at me.
Zuriek tried to raise his hand, but then a rolling shock of pain went through the warrior with such force that it silenced him. He went rigid and gagged, a grotesque, liquid choking emitted from his open mouth, and suddenly, Zuriek was vomiting a jet of viscous black bile, spewing it across the deck plates. He cried out in raw agony and sank to his knees before retching again, his hunched form quaking in uncontrolled spasms. The veteran went to his side, the Contemptor stooping down to gather him up, and as he did, the Bitterblood sensors registered something in the dark pool of steaming ejecta. Tiny forms that resembled maggots were hatching as he watched, turning inside out to become silver-black flies with wet, flickering wings. Zuriek howled and drew into himself, his dense bones cracking against one another with the force of a palsy. Drawn back by the legionary's cries, two of the serfs stood mouths agape at the chamber entrance, and for a moment the veteran thought they were struck dumb by the sight of a nigh invulnerable Death Guard in such agony. But then, the human menials began clawing at their exposed skin and screaming, before they too spat out their innards in streaming black floods.
Contagion!
Bellowed the Bitterblood, the word at once a digitized shout and a warning broadcast across the Voxnet.
Contagion here! Seal the decks!
A trembling hand reached up and clawed at the veteran's armor. "Help me!" gasped Zuriek, as his eyes turned milky. All across the legionary's exposed flesh, hundreds of livid boils were rising to the surface of his skin, each one set in a cluster of 3.
He found Voyan in one of the meditation cells, carefully ministering to his war gear. The apothecary bowed slightly to him. Garrow noted immediately that Voyan's robes were the plain, unadorned clothes of a citizen petitioner, not the duty mantle of an Astartes. The sewn patterns of the two-headed Aquila and the skull and star of the Death Guard were absent. "Merrick?" he asked. "We prepare to leave, and yet you have kept yourself isolated from us. What's wrong?" Voyan halted and glanced at his commander. Garrow saw something new there, a kind of defeat, a melancholy that was etching into the lines of his face. "Nathaniel," he began, "I have read the tracts you gave me, and I feel as if my eyes have been opened." Garrow smiled. "That's good, brother. We can draw strength from them. Hear me out. You might disagree." The battle captain hesitated. "Go on." "I have kept this from you, from all of the others. What happened at Istvan, what Horus and Mortarion did, and then Grulgor and Decius." He took a shuddering breath. "To my very core, brother, these things shook me." Voyan looked at his hands. "I found myself frozen, my weapons useless. My weapons useless." His eyes met Garrow's, and there was fear there, true terror. "It broke me, Nathaniel. These things, I fear I may be a part of them. Responsible." Merrick, no. Yes, brother, yes, he insisted. Voyan pressed something into his palm, and Garrow studied it. A bronze disc, embossed with a star and skull symbol, crushed and twisted. I must atone for my dalliance with the lodges, Nathaniel. The Lectitio Divinitatis has shown me that. You had me promise that if the lodge ever compelled me to turn from the Emperor, I would reject them, and so I do. The lodges were part of all this. You were right to shun them. He looked away. And I was so very wrong to join them. The leaden certainty in his voice told Garrow that no argument would shift his brother from this path. What will you do? Voyan indicated his war gear. I relinquish my honor as an Astartes and warrior of the 14th Legion. I have had my fill of death and treachery. My service from this point on will be to the Apothecaria Majoris of Terra. I have decided to dedicate the rest of my life to search for a cure for the malady that claimed Decius and the others. If Grulgor did not lie, then that horror may already be spreading among our kinsmen, and I must hold true to my oath as a healer above and beyond my oath as a Death Guard. Garrow studied his friend for a long moment, then extended a hand to him. Very well, Merrick. I hope you will find victory in this new battle. Voyan shook his hand. And I hope you will find victory in yours. Merrick Voyan served as an apothecary of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A member of Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow's 7th Grade Company, Merrick tended to the wounds of his kindred, not only in terms of physical wounds, but also mental scars. A confidant of his indomitable battle captain for many years of service, despite his senior officer's condemnation, Merrick joined the secretive warrior lodge of his kinsmen, with the intent of bolstering camaraderie and free thinking among the 14th's ranks. Swearing to uphold his oath to his battle captain that he would never keep secrets from him despite his membership, Merrick, though dealing a blow to his commander's bonds of trust, would in time redeem himself in the eyes of Straight Arrow Garrow. Accompanying his great company during their cooperative mission alongside the Emperor's Children First Company in quelling a rebellion upon Istvan extremists, during combat against a fell warsinger, Garrow sustained injuries to his leg, arm and torso. His wounds staunched by Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile, much to the disdain of Merrick. The battle captain was ordered to recover aboard the Imperial frigate Eisenstein, deemed unfit for battlefield operations. The War Master, Horus Lupercal, by this time enthralled to the ruinous powers. Garrow's concerns of the Lodge's nature, as a means to spread dangerous propaganda, was proven true. The schemes of the traitors within their midst, enacted during the betrayal of Istvan III. Aiding Garrow's housecarl, Caleb Aaron, in his investigation of the actions of Commander Ignatius Grulgor, the duo uncovered Death Guard personnel arming virus bombs to be unleashed upon the surface. Confronted by Grulgor, as Caleb brought word to Garrow, brother fought brother as the plots of the traitors was revealed. The noble housecarl sacrificing his life to save Garrow, Voyan, and brother Sendek's life, as a virus bomb warhead threatened to infect all with its deadly payload. Grulgor and his command cadre destroyed by the Life Eater virus. The 70 survivors comprised of Death Guard loyalists and the Lunar Wolves refugees of a Yaktan cruise, Kirill Sinderman, Mercedes Olaton, and Euphrates Keeler. Fending off the resurrected Ignatius Grulgor and his men as the Eisenstein ventured to Holy Terra via the warp. Despite Voyan's protestation, the crew of the Eisenstein detonated their ship's warp drive, banishing the Plague Marines from real space at the cost of the infection of Brother Solon Decius and their stranding within the void. Rescued by Primarch Rogel Dawn aboard his flagship, the Phalanx, begrudgingly, the Praetorian of Terra accepted the news of his brother's betrayal of the Imperium and made all haste to inform the Master of Mankind, personally. Imprisoned within the somnus citadel of Luna, under the watchful eye of the Silent Sisterhood, Voyan and Garrow would be released as the spread of Nurgle's rot within Solon Decius turned his form into the greater demon known as the Lord of Flies. Nathaniel Garrow banishing the entity as they dueled upon the airless plains of Luna. Following the destruction wrought by the entity, Voyan declared his intentions to renounce his oaths as a warrior. Giving Merrick the copy of the Lectitio Divinitatis, which had once belonged to Caleb Aaron, Nathaniel hoped such text to inspire his crestfallen kinsman to find significance through faith, as he himself had found in his praise to the Emperor. Dedicating his life solely as a healer, issuing his armor henceforth as he sought to never again fight as an angel of death. Voyan sought to find a cure to aid his afflicted legion, using his expertise as an apothecary. Garrow, perceiving Merrick's adherence to clinical logic to be a failing in a galaxy rent by supernatural horrors, Nathaniel decried his attempts to concoct an antidote to their kinsmen, knowing in his heart that no cure could be found for the affliction of their corrupted souls. Intending to take the remains of the Lord of Flies to the facility of the Jovian installation upon the moon of Io, knowing himself to be functionally immortal, Merrick could not stand idle as a remnant of a tarnished legion with no purpose. The containment of the samples taken of Solon Decius's body breached during Garrow's visit despite the chamber being hermetically sealed. The powers of the warp dashed Merrick's hopes as the metallic cylinders unleashed carnivorous flies. All remnants taken from Solus and Grulgor cleansed, with no means for Merrick to concoct a cure for his legion. Voyan felt an insect bite in the form of a trio of tiny saws, as voices of an unknown entity whispered in his ears. His skin blistering into lesions as Garrow readied to fell his infected friend, Merrick perished at the hands of his battle captain, yet the Plague God would not grant Voyan the sanctity of death. The Lord of Flies, possessing Merrick's body upon Terra prior to the devastating siege. Nathaniel Garrow, fueled by the defilement of his friend's memory, was taunted by the demon that he allowed him to become its vessel. Unable to destroy the entity, as it reformed from every strike of Libertas or mass reactive bolter shell which tore its fetid flesh asunder. Only with aid from Malcador the Sigillite's incredible psychic might was the Lord of Flies drowned in the psychic flame of a miniature star. The husk of Merrick Voyan finally laid to rest as the Horus Heresy drew to a close. His legacy as a compassionate healer is for many hard to believe that such a soul was capable of being sired from the ranks of the Death Guard Legion.
Solon Decius served as an Astartes of the Death Guard Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. The youngest member of Nathaniel Garrow's 7th Great Company command squad, Solon would face the strange creature known as the Warsinger during the compliance of the world of Istvan Free. His life would be saved during the melee by Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow, yet would result in Garrow being severely wounded, preventing him and his command squad from being deployed during the Istvan Free betrayal. Decius would flee the betrayal of Istvan Free alongside his captain aboard the frigate Eisenstein, with the news of the betrayal from Emperor's Children captain Saul Tarvitz. The Death Guard loyalists would attempt to traverse to Holy Terra to bring word of the betrayal to the Emperor of Mankind. On board the vessel, the loyalists would be confronted by the reanimated corpses of their treacherous brethren, with Solon being injured during the battle. Infected with the warp-twisted disease known as Nurgle's Rot, Decius would suffer untold maladies, pain and suffering as the Eisenstein journeyed to the Sol System. Upon the ship's arrival at the moon of Luna, Decius would be confined within the Somnus Citadel under the protection and monitoring of the Sisters of Silence. Despite the best efforts of the Citadel's apothecaries, Decius would cry out for aid from the ruinous powers to take his pain away. Submitting fully to the thrall of the Plague God, Nurgle, Solon Decius would be reborn as the demonic entity, the Lord of Flies. Escaping the Medicaid facility and slaying many Astartes and Sisters of Silence, the Lord of Flies would attempt to wreak havoc on the throne world. Yet Nathaniel Garrow would stop the creature from fleeing, and upon the surface of Luna, the two would battle. Garrow would slay the demon and cast its wretched soul into the Immaterium, yet the Lord of Flies would not remain idle for long. Confronting Garrow 9 Terran Standard years thereafter, prior to the Siege of Terra. Infecting the walking city with swarms of flies, the demon would transform the populace into fly-infested zombies. Alongside his knight-errant brothers-in-arms, Garrow would once more face his former ally. The creature would speak with the voice of Solon Decius, goading Garrow with offers to rejoin the Death Guard with his inevitable defeat at the hands of the demon. Defeating the Chaos Incursion, the Lord of Flies would retreat after stating that the being known as Solon Decius had now been utterly consumed. Returning during the Battle of White Mountain, the Knights Errant would once more face the Lord of Flies. Revealing its host to be Garrow's former ally and loyalist Astartes, Apothecary Merrick Voyan, Garrow would once more slay the body of a former friend. As the host's body died, the Lord of Flies would move to possess the Knight Errant and former World Eater, Mesa Varan. Resolving to destroy himself with a brace of grenades, Varan would sacrifice his life in order to remain untainted by the corruption of the demon. As it sought to possess more Astartes, the Lord of Flies' defeat would seem impossible, yet with the intervention of Malcador the Sigillite upon the slopes of the White Mountain, the wretched creature would be destroyed. Unleashing his psychic might to disintegrate the being into little more than ash, Malcador would warn the Knights Errant that one day such a being would spawn once again from the Immaterium. Though fortunately as of yet, the return of such a foul being has not been forthcoming. Chrysos Morturg served as a member of the Death Guard during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Taken in by the 14th Legion, despite being born not from Holy Terror or Barbarus, Chrysos would be part of an initiative of emergency recruits needed to sustain the Legion's numbers after its decimation during the Rangdar genocide campaign. Rising to the rank of lieutenant and discovering latent psycho powers, Morturg would be disliked by his battle brothers for his newly discovered traits. Growing bitter and morbidly resentful in temperament, Morturg would nonetheless prove to be a talented commander and distinguished warrior. Training to become a librarian, his efforts to hone his psychic potential would be stifled with Primarch Mortarian's decision to disband the Legion's librarium. Marked as a proponent of witchcraft by his Primarch, Morturg would be reassigned to the Legion's Destroyer Corps. Often comprised of legionaries deemed too unstable to be deployed in other companies, Morturg's resentment for his Legion would only grow. Marked for death by his battle brothers and Primarch during the betrayal of Istvan III, Morturg would defy his Legion and stand as one of the Loyalist Death Guard's most prominent commanders. Surviving the betrayal, Morturg would escape the planet alongside a few scattered remnants of the Loyalist troops of other legions. His body mutilated during the conflict, Morturg's body would be reshaped and healed by Mechanicum Magos Caleb Decima. Salvaging only his scarred head and a portion of his torso, Morturg would become a meld of metal and heretical conglomerations of biomancy. Testifying to the Terran War Council of the betrayal of the War Master and the traitor legions, Morturg would swear vengeance against his so-called brothers, stating,
"I will not pretend to understand the reasons that drove my brothers down the path of ruin. That is for others to tell. Instead, I will seek to remind my lords of what these warriors once were, and so show the height from which they fell."
Founding the Black Shield Warband of remnant Loyalist Death Guard Astartes, Morturg would survive the Horus Heresy and be promoted to the rank of Captain of the 108th Independent Company. Assigned command of the Occludus Monitoring Station assigned to observe the treacherous Ghoul Stars during 063.M31, 5 solar years following the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, Morturg would intercept a mysterious astropathic message believed to have originated during the Great Crusade. The message alluding to the actions of the renegade Black Shield Warband, the Ashen Claws. Yet all records of Chrysos Morturg after this time have been lost to history. Durek Rask served as the Death Guard's Master of Ordnance during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Exhibiting fanatical loyalty to his Primarch, Mortarion, Rask would view the lord of his homeworld, Barbarus, as a savior beyond reproach. Rask's loyalty to his Gene Father combined with his intelligence for siege warfare would aid him in rising through the ranks of the 14th Legion. Given his title in the aftermath of the Siege of Vastpol, wherein he would lose his left eye and be horrifically scarred. With Mortarion's decision to side with the traitor War Master, Horus Lupercal, Rask would be the first and loudest supporter of his decision, bolstered due to his membership to the Death Guard's 7-pillared Warrior Lodge. Fighting during the betrayal of Istvan III, Rask would lead a vanguard attack against the Loyalist Death Guard legionaries. Yet in the ensuing battle, not even his zeal could protect him from death. Erud Van served as a tech marine of the Death Guard during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Known as a forge tyrant amongst the 14th Legion, Van was a master of both alchemical warfare and technological systems. With Mortarion's decision to aid Horus Lupercal in his traitorous rebellion, Van would remain loyal not to the Imperium, but the Mechanicum, renouncing his legion and becoming a Black Shield under the warband of Endred Har, the War Orphans. Serving as his second-in-command, Van would fight the Zana incursion wherein he would be wounded by Har, objecting to his decision to help the Calidus assassin assigned to raid the secret weapons facility beneath the renegade planet of Zana II. Yielding to Har's will, reluctantly, Van would deactivate the explosive collars of the prisoners of Zana and lead the forces that would capture the Ordinatus weapon, Ulator Asherax. By the battle's end, denying the War Master 3 deadly Ordinatus weapon platforms to use in his war of treachery and betrayal.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The dregs of the Death Guard Legion persist in a miasmal purgatory, their intentions stultified by their patron's commitment to lionize rebirth, requiring the destruction of all to which they tend. Each soul claimed by the Death Guard, sacrificed to the Lord of all as part of the cycle of creation and renewal. The fodder of entire species has been claimed by such a force in efforts to one day bring forth even their own extinction. Not all endeavors may produce a satisfactory outcome, no matter the effort, skill, nor toil made to see them ripen for harvest. So be sure that you do not commit yourself to endeavors which shall never bear fruit. For many have been driven to madness or ruin by such undertakings, not knowing when to fold their hand. And the greatest loss is that sustained by desperation, knowing that no option for success shall be forthcoming.